We are raking the bottom of the barrel, Senator. We must let these people go every day. We must let these people go. We have no choice, Senator, and I would hope.
A state parole board member says he freed the trigger man in the Trinity River massacre to prevent prison overcrowding. Topping our news this evening, the Texas Senate wants to know more about the controversial early release of the man who killed 3 Dallas County Sheriff's deputies.
Leonardo Lopez left prison last December after serving only 16 years of a life sentence. He had been convicted for the 1971 execution-style shootings of 3 sheriff's deputies in the Trinity River bottoms. 5 law officers were ambushed while serving a burglary warrant in West Dallas. A 4th officer suffered gunshot wounds and a 5th narrowly escaped. Channel 8's Robert Riggs is in our Austin newsroom now with a report. Robert?
Gloria, a parole board member, admitted today there is an unspoken quota to release 150 inmates a day from state prisons. Half of those are parolees from Dallas County. The parole of police killer Leonardo Lopez outraged the Senate Criminal Justice Committee.
And how many people would he have to kill before you wouldn't let him out?
Senator Ted Lyon of Mesquite confronted parole board members with Lopez's long rap sheet. Also, prison records from 16 prior evaluations for parole showed that Lopez ran the lowest probability for success in the free world. Lopez also had a jailhouse drug problem and displayed little interest in self-improvement. So how did the triple killer get out after serving 1 day for every 55 days of his life sentence?
Crude as it might be, Senator, you know we cannot keep everyone. If we see 10 people, we're letting 8 of them go, Senator. I'm going to say the things that no one wants to hear. The problem is we cannot keep everyone that we need to keep. If we could do that, this would be a perfect world, and there's no way I would have let this man out. But
Parole board member Ron Givens says he voted to free Lopez to make room for young, violent offenders. Due to prison crowding, Givens says he had no choice but to release someone who has been locked up for nearly 2 decades. Parole board members concluded that Lopez is not a danger to society. But Senator Lyon says the board made a mistake and predicts Lopez will commit another crime within a year. Budget figures released today show that Texas needs to spend an additional $2 billion just to build enough prison space so inmates can serve at least 1/3 of their time. Tracy.
Barbara Miller, a Waco truck stop waitress, single-handedly hunted down the alleged abductor of her daughter long before police took an interest in the case. Miller says she urged the Waco police 6 months ago to question the man who is now wanted for what appears to be serial killings. Miller's daughter, 21-year-old Regina Moore, a Waco prostitute, was last seen alive with Kenneth McDuff last October. Miller says federal marshals began listening to her story when Waco convenience clerk Melissa Northrup disappeared in March. By then, Miller had filled a diary with details of her personal dragnet.
If the police had listened to you, do you think there'd be a lot of women alive today?
Oh, yes. Melissa Northrup didn't have to go through this. That really hurts me because she's pregnant. And my daughter, you know, if they'd just listened and went out.
Regina Moore's cousin, also a prostitute, says McDuff was a regular customer who attacked 2 streetwalkers.
One of them, he raped Ducky and Bonnie, and he's a violent person, but he's never showed it with me.
Last October, Barbara Miller and her husband tracked McDuff to the campus of the Texas State Technical College here in Waco. McDuff was studying to become a machinist and is remembered by dorm residents as a heavy crack user.
Miller spotted McDuff's pickup truck with a broken windshield. Her daughter had always vowed to kick out a customer's windshield if she got in trouble. Students who live here remain afraid of McDuff and want to remain anonymous. They say McDuff had a mean streak and ballistic temper. McDuff got defensive when Miller and her husband confronted him.
When he jumped back and said, "Don't try to pin this on me," and threw his hands up, I thought, uh-oh.
And when I saw him in that room and talked to him in after he threw that fit, I mean, it's something just washed over me. I knew he killed my daughter. And I still know that.
Regina Moore vanished from a seedy street corner bench where she hustled. And her mother believes many other prostitutes may have mysteriously disappeared because nobody cared. Robert Riggs, Channel 8 News, Waco. The broomstick killer tried to bribe his way out of prison in 1981. Kenneth McDuff, now the suspect in the disappearance of 7 women, offered a parole board official $10,000 to vote to free him. McDuff was convicted of bribery and denied parole. 8 years later, after being denied parole 13 times, a parole board pressed by prison crowding gave McDuff his freedom.
When the parole was granted to Mr. McDuff, did you shudder? Did you worry?
Well, certainly. To answer your question, yes.
Inside a minimum security prison at Sugar Land, south of Houston, the parole board member who voted against McDuff's release says he worried that the killer of 3 Fort Worth teenagers would kill again.
Morning, men. I'm Henry Keene from the parole board, and I'm here to interview you.
Henry Keene of Dallas is a 5-year veteran of the parole board appointed by former Governor Bill Clements. On this day, Keene interviews inmates that are becoming eligible for parole.
If you had the opportunity to be released, what would you expect to achieve in the free world?
I wouldn't hang around the people that I was with, change my environment and my living standards,
Okay.
You know.
Keene conducts up to 200 parole interviews a week.
Mr. McDuff certainly didn't deserve to be released on parole after the heinous crime that he committed and killed those people. 20 years is, to me, is not very much punishment for a grotesque offense like that.
Police suspect McDuff killed a Temple woman only 4 days after he was released on parole in October 1989. He later violated parole, but spent only 2 months in prison before being released again. Former associates say McDuff uses LSD, crack cocaine, and speed, but the parole board did not require regular drug testing, and it apparently missed his arrest on DWI charges. Texas Senator Ted Lyon, who chairs the Criminal Justice Committee, plans to launch an investigation into why the parole board freed Kenneth McDuff. Some members of the parole board say they are being used as whipping boys for the legislature's failure to pass tougher laws and to build more prisons. Robert Riggs, Channel 8 News, Sugar Land.
The nationwide manhunt for McDuff ended this afternoon with his arrest in Kansas City. McDuff is the prime suspect in the recent abductions or murders of 6 women in Waco and Austin. Channel 8's Robert Riggs has been following this story. He joins us now from our Austin newsroom. Robert?
John, 6 Kansas City police officers armed with shotguns surprised McDuff as he was entering a landfill after lunch today. McDuff had been in Kansas City for a month. 46-year-old Kenneth McDuff was caught working on a privately operated trash truck under the alias of Richard Fowler. Police received a tip from a viewer of last week's episode of America's Most Wanted. McDuff had been arrested under his alias by Kansas City police in April for soliciting prostitution and were able to match fingerprints. Police say McDuff tried to flee but surrendered without a fight when he realized he was surrounded. U.S. Marshals led a manhunt for McDuff, who was a fugitive on federal gun and drug charges. But law enforcement officers suspect the paroled killer of 3 Fort Worth teenagers is involved in the disappearance of at least 6 Central Texas women. McDuff's alleged accomplice in the abduction of Colleen Reed from an Austin car wash last December says McDuff planned to kill the young woman after they sexually assaulted her. Reed's body has not been found. Last week, police found the body of 22-year-old Melissa Northrup in a southeast Dallas gravel pit. Police suspect McDuff abducted Northrup from the Waco convenience store in March, where she worked as a clerk. Kansas City police say that McDuff insisted he was Richard Fowler when he was arrested, but changed his story and admitted he was McDuff when shown fingerprints. He is now being taken to the federal marshal's office. Federal marshals from Waco are en route to Kansas City to bring him back to Texas. John, Chip.
Federal marshals, including agents who hunted Panamanian strongman Manuel Noriega, have been on McDuff's trail for 7 weeks. They feared the paroled killer of 3 Fort Worth teenagers would kill again. He's the prime suspect in the abductions of 6 women in Central Texas who are dead or remain missing. Channel 8's Robert Riggs talked to the arresting officer and joins us live now from our Austin bureau. Robert?
Tracy, the suspected serial killer was caught by Kansas City police without putting up a fight today. 6 officers armed with shotguns surrounded a trash truck carrying McDuff as it was driving into the city landfill after lunch.
U.S. Marshals at this hour are questioning 46-year-old Kenneth McDuff, who was caught working on a privately operated trash truck under the alias of Richard Fowler. An informant who saw McDuff on last week's episode of America's Most Wanted tipped Kansas City police to the parole killer's whereabouts. Police arrested McDuff under his alias in Kansas City on April 10th for soliciting prostitution from an undercover officer. This morning, the McLennan County Sheriff's Office in Waco identified McDuff's fingerprints from his prostitution arrest. Police surprised McDuff with a fake vehicle inspection. McDuff tried to jump from the trash truck but was surrounded. U.S. Marshals led a manhunt for McDuff, who was a fugitive on federal gun and drug charges. But law enforcement officers suspect the parole killer of 3 Fort Worth teenagers is involved in the disappearance of at least 6 Central Texas women. McDuff's alleged accomplice in the abduction of Colleen Reed from an Austin car wash last December says McDuff planned to kill the young woman after they sexually assaulted her. Reed's body has not been found. Last week, police found the body of 22-year-old Melissa Northrup in a southeast Dallas gravel pit. Police suspect McDuff abducted Northrup from the Waco convenience store in March, where she worked as a clerk.
Federal marshals from Waco are en route to Kansas City to bring McDuff back to Texas. Police want to question McDuff about the disappearance of 9 women, as well as the brutal execution-style slaying of 4 teenage girls in an Austin yogurt shop last December. Gloria.
Thank you, Robert.
We were getting calls from housewives afraid to leave their children at home in the daytime by themselves. It's a tremendous relief to the community, I should think.
The nationwide manhunt is over. A Texas parolee wanted for questioning in a string of murders is now under arrest. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us. The 2-month-long search for Kenneth Allen McDuff ends in Kansas City. The former death row inmate is suspected in the deaths of at least 6 women throughout parts of Central and North Texas. Channel 8's Vince Patton joins us now live from Missouri to begin our coverage of this story. Vince?
Chip, Kenneth McDuff is scheduled to appear in federal court at 10:30 tomorrow morning. Authorities have not said exactly what they will charge him with yet. But the prime suspect, who may be a serial killer in the eyes of police, has apparently spent the last few weeks as a trash man here in Kansas City.
U.S. Marshals took Kenneth Allen McDuff out of the federal courthouse Monday evening and moved him to a local jail. He will sit there overnight. McDuff had been working under the alias Richard Fowler as a trash man. Kansas City police nabbed him here at Laidlaw, the city's landfill, as he pulled in with a truckload of trash. Kansas City police had received the tip, and U.S. Marshals had joined them at the dump just moments earlier.
While we were meeting with the police department, Mr. McDuff showed up about a block down the street, and he was arrested by some Kansas City officers.
Okay, and you know it's McDuff?
Yes, the fingerprints confirmed that it was Mr. McDuff.
McDuff has been wanted on federal warrants for alleged distribution of LSD and possession of a firearm, a felony for a convict. McDuff was arrested here in Kansas City just a few weeks ago on charges of soliciting a prostitute. But he was using the name Richard Fowler, and no complete set of fingerprints was run. Instead, it appears it was the television show America's Most Wanted that apparently helped catch the man all Texas has been looking for.
Someone saw that program and felt that they recognized him and knew where he worked in Kansas City. They felt that he was working as a trash hauler, and they called the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department.
Now his flight as a fugitive is over.
McDuff, viewed as many by a walking indictment of the Texas parole system, is also already known as the broomstick killer for his brutal slayings of 3 teenagers in Fort Worth back in 1966. He was given the death penalty, but it was overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court, commuted to life, and then he was paroled in 1989. Channel 8's Robert Riggs joins us now live in Waco, where a task force hunting for McDuff was based. Robert?
Vince, Waco police suspect that McDuff killed a Waco woman here just 4 days after he was paroled in October 1989. Tonight, the people in this Central Texas community are relieved that McDuff is behind bars.
Waco truck stop waitress Barbara Miller prays that the arrest of Kenneth McDuff will provide clues to find her daughter. Miller personally hunted down and confronted McDuff last October. Miller's daughter, 21-year-old Regina Moore, was a drug addict who became a prostitute to support her habit. Moore was last seen alive with McDuff.
Thank God. Just thank God nobody else can be hurt. Because there's a lot of mothers out there, they're looking for their daughters. And I know how they feel, you know. And I pray for him, I do.
Last week, a southeast Dallas County gravel pit yielded the body of another of McDuff's suspected victims. 22-year-old Melissa Northrup, the pregnant mother of two, was abducted March 1st from the Waco convenience store where she worked. Northrup's husband had trained McDuff for a clerk's job at another quick pack store.
We are all very, very happy that this person has been taken off the streets. He can go and kill no more.
McDuff is a strong suspect of the disappearance of 6 women, including 28-year-old Colleen Reed, who, an alleged accomplice of McDuff, says McDuff randomly abducted from an Austin car wash last December. U.S. Marshals led a massive 7-week manhunt for McDuff.
All of us here are husbands. We have wives, we have daughters, we have sons. It's a relief that this man is not out there doing what he's suspected of doing.
McDuff mugged for the camera in a snapshot taken by Waco police when he volunteered to become a drug informant in January. Police rejected the parole killer's offer, unaware that McDuff would become the suspect in a brutal killing spree.
The U.S. Attorney, U.S. Marshals, and Texas Rangers have flown to Kansas City tonight to start the legal process to bring Kenneth McDuff back to Texas. McDuff tried to bribe his way to freedom in 1981. And sources tell me that prison psychiatrists determined that McDuff was dangerous. And so tonight the question remains, why did the parole board turn Kenneth McDuff loose on society? Tracy?
Okay, Robert, thank you.
22-year-old Valencia Joshua of Fort Worth was strangled to death by Kenneth McDuff, according to murder charges filed by the McLennan County Sheriff. Joshua's body was found in a shallow grave near the Waco campus of the Texas State Technical College in late March. McDuff was enrolled in a machine shop course there. A witness saw Joshua visit McDuff's dormitory in late February. McDuff's former cellmate, appearing in disguise out of fear, says the parole killer gets high on killing and that McDuff buries his victims in shallow graves.
Very sadistic. He thrives on hurting people, and the more people he kills, better enjoyment he gets out of it.
Police want to question McDuff about the disappearance and murders of at least 8 women. Half of the victims were prostitutes. McDuff has been identified as a customer of prostitutes on Harry Hines in West Dallas. His old cellmate says McDuff randomly abducts any female that appears vulnerable.
If you put yourself in his position, in the right position, where he thinks he can get away with it, he'll take you.
Austin police also want to question McDuff about the slayings of 4 teenage girls at a yogurt shop last December. Police say McDuff has not been eliminated as a suspect in the shooting and burning of the victims.
Solving a string of killings may depend on McDuff's cooperation, and that's not likely. Until this day, McDuff denies killing 3 Fort Worth teenagers in 1966 that got him the death sentence.
Row inmate Kenneth McDuff, suspected in the abductions and murders of at least half a dozen Texas women, is brought back to Texas for questioning. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us.
McDuff was arrested Monday in Kansas City. Federal marshals brought him back to Waco late this afternoon. Channel 8's Robert Riggs is in the McLennan County area now and joins us live with the latest. Robert?
Tracy, just to update you, McDuff had been in the Kansas City, Missouri area for about a month. He first went up there, checked into a homeless shelter, got a job working on a garbage truck. I have learned that 2 co-workers on that garbage truck told McDuff they had seen his case on Unsolved Mysteries and that he joked he would share the reward money with them. Federal authorities now suspect that McDuff may have left a reign of terror behind in Kansas City.
A U.S. Marshal Service jet returned suspected serial killer Kenneth McDuff to Waco under heavy security. The 46-year-old parole killer of 3 Fort Worth teenagers in 1966 wore chains and leg irons. Authorities want to question McDuff about the abductions and murders of a dozen Texas women. Appearing underweight with his eyes cast down, McDuff denied his role in any killings.
Did you kill anyone, Mr. McDuff?
Law officers say McDuff is now a suspect in the disappearance of more women in the Kansas City, Missouri area. 3 women have been abducted from convenience stores since McDuff fled to Missouri using an alias a month ago. Law enforcement sources say McDuff remains ice cold on questions about missing Texas women. McDuff was arrested on federal gun and drug charges and faces a murder charge for the strangulation of a Fort Worth woman.
He should not be out because he killed 3 people, and he was on death row. That's not right. It's not right for anybody who's on death row to be free. That is not right at all.
McDuff is also a suspect in the abduction and murder of a clerk from a Waco convenience store. The body of 22-year-old Melissa Northrup, the pregnant mother of 2 children, was found in a southeast Dallas County gravel pit last week. As McDuff left the Waco Federal Courthouse, Northrup's family cried for Old Testament justice of an eye for an eye.
Vengeance is mine, thank the Lord! He's gonna get you!
McDuff's attorney made clear that the accused killer does not want to talk to police.
McDuff returns to federal court here on Friday for an evidence hearing. Prosecutors say then they will reveal more information about his role in alleged killings. Sources say that the search of McDuff's Kansas City, Missouri apartment has yielded evidence in some of the cases, and that McDuff was trying to buy a gun and slept with butcher knives under his pillow. Tracy?
Okay, Robert, thank you very much.
It makes me sick to be part of this man, is what it does to me. I mean, I don't know, like I told Mom, I said, I just can't believe I'm part of somebody so cruel.
The daughter of suspected serial killer Kenneth McDuff believes her father tried to bribe his way out of prison.
On tonight's update, an exclusive interview as part of a 2-month investigation into the parole of Kenneth McDuff. Tracy has the night off. I'm John McKay.
Good evening, everybody. How did a convicted killer get out of prison? That question has haunted victims' families and has left the highest levels of state government embarrassed. Tonight, Channel 8's Robert Riggs has the first of a series of investigative reports on McDuff's parole.
U.S. Marshals led a nationwide manhunt for the murderer known as the Broomstick Killer. Kenneth McDuff returned to Waco last month in chains under heavily armed guard.
Did you kill anyone, Mr. McDuff?
McDuff was convicted in 1966 for the abduction and murder of one of 3 Tarrant County teenagers. A grisly confession by his accomplice described how McDuff strangled the teenage girl with a broomstick after raping her. But McDuff escaped his date with the electric chair and was released on parole in 1989. Now, McDuff has been charged with the early 1992 murder of 22-year-old Valencia Joshua of Fort Worth. Joshua's body was found in a shallow grave near where McDuff attended trade school in Waco. And McDuff is also a suspect in a string of sadistic sexual murders of other young women, all committed since his parole date.
Vengeance is mine, thank the Lord! He's gonna get you!
Police sources say McDuff may be responsible for the murders of 4 teenage girls in an Austin yogurt shop last December. And McDuff has been named by an accomplice as the killer responsible for the kidnap, rape, and torture murder of 28-year-old Austin accountant Colleen Reed. McDuff is also suspected of kidnapping and killing Waco convenience store clerk Melissa Northrup on March 1st of this year. The body of the pregnant mother of 2 children was found in a southeast Dallas County gravel pit.
He should not be out because he killed 3 people, and he was on death row. That's not right. It's not right for anybody who's on death row to be free.
In all, McDuff is a suspect in at least 15 brutal murders, all allegedly committed since he was released from state prison. The question of how Kenneth McDuff got parole troubles victims' families and law enforcement officers. Kenneth McDuff's estranged daughter believes her father bribed his way out of prison.
The statement was that there was $25,000 offered.
Teresa Allen says that in 1987 she was privy to family conversations about paying a $25,000 bribe to an unidentified person in the parole system. According to Allen, the family wanted McDuff moved to an East Texas prison because he would have a better chance of getting out. A few months later, in September 1987, McDuff in fact got transferred to the newly opened Michael unit outside Palestine. McDuff was on the road to freedom.
Do you think he bribed his way out? Do you think that's the way he got out?
I think it's very possible. I think very, because how could someone with his record get out? I mean, how can they get parole?
Allen started visiting McDuff at Retrieve Prison in the spring of 1986. Allen says she is McDuff's daughter from a 1964 rape in which McDuff tried to kill her mother. Parole board panels repeatedly denied McDuff parole while he was in Retrieve and other Houston area prisons.
McDuff had a reputation here as a quiet, passive inmate who did what he was told to do, who said yes, sir, and no, sir. McDuff knew how to do his time.
McDuff made leather goods in the prison craft shop. He completed a graphic arts printing course and took college correspondence courses. For 10 years, McDuff's house was a small concrete cubicle inside a prison dorm built in 1933. Allen says McDuff did the right things to try to fool the parole board into thinking he was rehabilitated.
He'd always talked about, the classes he was taking, and he got into church and all this other stuff, that, he was going to get out on good behavior. But to me, it seemed like it was just a game he was playing with everybody, because he already had intentions of maybe going wrong when he got out. He just wanted to play the game, to show us how smart he is.
McDuff has a history of trying to bribe his way out of prison. 11 years ago, during an interview with a parole commissioner, McDuff said, "If you can help me make this parole and get me out of TDC, I can guarantee that you will find $10,000 in the glove compartment of your car. I can guarantee you the $10,000 because my dad promised me I could have that much just for that purpose. He's pretty well off." But the parole commissioner turned McDuff in. A Brazoria County jury convicted McDuff of the bribery charge in 1982. Just 7 years after the bribery conviction, and after having been denied parole 14 times, McDuff was released from prison on October 11, 1989.
Law enforcement officers suspect McDuff raped and killed again just 4 days later. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Waco says it is investigating the bribery allegations. Tomorrow, we'll tell the story of how members of the parole board changed their minds about Kenneth McDuff. Robert Riggs, Channel 8 News, Austin.
A former parole board member involved in the McDuff case is one of 4 targets of a new investigation called for today by Governor Richards. Richards wants to know if former members of the parole board sold their services to get inmates out of jail early.
I want to emphasize to you that we do not have hard evidence of any crime. We do have allegations. We do have smoke. And we do have suspicions that I think must be cleared up immediately, given the serious nature of the subject matter.
Richards refused to name the 4 former board members under investigation. A similar probe in 1989 found no wrongdoing.
In the news tonight, who allowed the release of murderer Kenneth McDuff? This evening, we talked to the former parole board member who cast the critical vote to let McDuff go. Congress takes a vote on ending the nation's rail strike. And General Dynamics workers protest a plan to share their work with Korea. Stay with us. The update is coming next.
Working in the spirit of Texas, from WFAA-TV, this is the News 8 Update.
I have kept up with and studied Kenneth McDuff for quite some time, and this individual is a very violent, very vicious, cold-blooded person who evidently has no conscience.
The sheriff who helped put Kenneth McDuff on death row 23 years ago now agonizes over how McDuff got paroled. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us. Tracy has the night off. The continuation of a 2-month-long News 8 investigation into the parole of Kenneth McDuff tops our news tonight. McDuff became known as the broomstick killer for his brutal murder of 3 Fort Worth teenagers in 1966. Now, he's a suspected serial killer being investigated for the abduction, torture, and murder of as many as 15 women in Central Texas. Channel 8's Robert Riggs tonight has an exclusive report about McDuff's parole.
James Granberry cast the crucial vote that freed convicted killer Kenneth McDuff from prison. Granberry voted to free McDuff after first removing himself from the case because of a long-standing personal friendship with McDuff's attorney. Kenneth McDuff was a former death row inmate, convicted of killing one of 3 Fort Worth teenagers in 1966. McDuff was accused of abducting the trio, raping and strangling the girl with a broomstick. For 23 years, McDuff lived in maximum security prisons. 14 different parole board panels denied McDuff freedom. In 1989, McDuff's 15th parole request went to a 3-member panel consisting of Commissioner Cora Mosley, parole board members James Granberry and Chris Mealy. The case arrived 1 month after Granberry was appointed to the board by Governor Bill Clements. The approval of parole requires 2 yes votes.
I had probably read the McDuff case probably more thoroughly than any case I'd ever looked at, because one night about 9:30, he was in my panel, and I was reviewing those cases, and I noticed there where an old high school buddy of mine was his lawyer. So I picked up the phone and called him. He talked to me for about 2 hours, telling me all about the McDuff situation.
Granberry's old high school buddy is Gary Jackson. Gary Jackson and his wife Gloria have represented McDuff for 18 years. They practice law in Lindale. It's a small East Texas town outside Tyler where Gary Jackson grew up with Granberry. Granberry says Jackson is an outstanding man who did a tremendous amount of research trying to prove McDuff was innocent. The Jacksons refused to discuss their relationship with Granberry and our request for an interview. After their discussion of the McDuff case, Granberry wrote this internal memo saying, "I wish to abstain from voting due to a long-standing personal friendship with the attorney representing Mr. McDuff's parole procedure." At his request, Granberry was replaced on the panel. The panel then voted 2-1 to parole McDuff. But Tarrant County District Attorney Tim Curry and the Brazoria County District Attorney had protested McDuff's release.
It was a heinous crime and certainly a crime that nobody convicted of should have ever been released on, as far as I'm concerned.
The protest forced another hearing before a second panel on whether to withdraw McDuff's parole. Granberry was a member of that second panel. Just 2 weeks after abstaining from the original panel because of his relationship with McDuff's attorney, Granberry broke a 1-1 tie on the second panel and voted to free McDuff.
Now, if you would recuse yourself once, why not again, especially when you are casting the critical vote for withdrawal? You could withdraw the parole. You stood between Kenneth McDuff and freedom.
No, let's get this. I didn't approve his parole. I merely continued his parole planning, and there's a big difference.
But you could have stopped it.
Honored.
You could have stopped.
So could.
Everybody else had already voted. Their vote was
Henry
set.
King. Well, I'm not. I guess I could if I voted the other way. We could have stopped it. But I don't have a crystal ball, and I didn't know what the fellow was going to do. In my opinion, he was. He'd be a useful citizen.
It was disbelief, disgust, and very sickening that this could possibly be taking place.
Falls County Sheriff Larry Pamplin helped his father capture McDuff 24 years ago in a blazing gun battle. He says McDuff had threatened to kill his family. When he heard McDuff was on the loose, Pamplin warned fellow officers.
I don't know when. I don't know if it'll be this week, next month, 6 months, or a year from now. I said, but I feel that sooner or later you're going to have bodies showing up, young females, possibly teenagers, and this will be a good suspect to keep in mind. Unfortunately, apparently, history has repeated itself.
Robert Riggs, Channel 8 News.
Last night, we reported the U.S. Attorney's Office in Waco is investigating another aspect of the McDuff case, allegations that McDuff's relatives may have offered a bribe to try to win his freedom. That investigation centers on events that were alleged to have occurred in 1987, more than 2 years before the convening of the parole panel that finally freed McDuff.
From WFAA-TV, this is the News 8 Update.
I told the parole board that Kenneth McDuff was possibly the most extraordinarily violent criminal ever to set foot in Falls County, Texas.
Convicted killer Kenneth McDuff went free even after violating parole. Tonight, the News 8 Update continues its 2-month-long investigation into the parole of suspected serial killer Kenneth McDuff. A grand jury in Waco today indicted McDuff for the slayings of 2 women. The McLennan County panel returned a capital murder charge. On conviction, there are only 2 sentencing options, life behind bars or the death penalty. McDuff faces the capital murder charge for the alleged abduction and killing of 22-year-old Melissa Ann Northrup, who disappeared from a Waco convenience store in March. McDuff was also indicted for the murder of Valencia Joshua. Her body was found near the Waco Technical School, where McDuff had classes. Despite objections from prosecutors, Kenneth McDuff walked out of prison a free man in 1989. A short time after his release, he threatened to kill a teenager. His parole was revoked because of that incident, but then, just 5 months later, the parole board staff turned McDuff loose again. Tonight, Channel 8's Robert Riggs reports on how McDuff got out.
Suspected serial killer Kenneth McDuff gave warning signs of potential violence just 3 months after his parole. McDuff left prison a free man on October 11, 1989, after doing 23 years behind bars on death row and in maximum security prisons for a brutal murder. In confidential reports, McDuff's parole officer writes shortly after the release that McDuff gets very upset upon being referred to as a sex offender. Seems that he could be very dangerous or explosive if the wrong button is pushed. A few months later in Rosebud, near Waco, McDuff pushed the wrong button. He was arrested for making a terroristic threat, where he had been known years earlier as the town bully.
Witnesses say that McDuff was sitting outside this building on Main Street where he had been listening to a rock band practice. According to police reports, McDuff racially slurred a group of black teenagers who came walking by. When the African-American youngsters became offended, McDuff went to his car, pulled a large pocket knife, opened it, held it beside his leg, and then chased a 16-year-old boy down this courtyard while spewing out racial insults and threatening to kill him.
Robert McBee filed a complaint with the police.
The guy wasn't really what you'd call normal. I mean, like, you know, I can sit here and talk to you about something, but this guy, when he got started, he was in a little world of his own, you know. I mean, he didn't hear nothing.
McDuff was arrested and his parole revoked. The Falls County District Attorney had urged the parole board to keep McDuff in prison.
You didn't have to read Silence of the Lambs to know what his potential was if he were paroled out and set loose in Falls County anywhere else again.
James Granberry was a member of the parole board when he cast the deciding vote that freed McDuff in October 1989. Now, with McDuff once again behind bars, McDuff's attorney asked Granberry for help. Granberry had been appointed chairman of the parole board by Governor Bill Clements. Attorney Gary Jackson had represented McDuff for 17 years. Granberry calls Jackson an old high school buddy.
Gary had done tremendous amount of research into this case, had written reams and reams of things about it, and there's so many, of course his whole line of pursuit, and I hope I'm not speaking for him, I don't mean to, was that McDuff was innocent of his original crime that he was convicted for.
Jackson and his wife were working on a movie deal called Justice for McDuff. The screenplay would portray Jackson as the attorney who tries to prove McDuff is innocent and deserves a new trial. Jackson's wife declined to talk about the project, saying it was confidential. But McDuff's arrest put the movie project on hold. One person involved in the project says it was critical to get McDuff back out of prison. 1 month after McDuff's parole was revoked, Gary Jackson filed this motion with the parole board to set aside the parole revocation. Jackson took the additional step 1 week later of writing this letter to parole board chairman James Granberry. Jackson writes, "Dear Jim, the revocation resulted from an incident at the rock concert which was nothing more than bad manners on the part of both McDuff and the long-haired hippie complainant. Neither the prison system, the parole system, McDuff, nor the complainant is benefited by sending McDuff back to the prison population." Jackson asked Granberry to share the facts in the letter with the remainder of the board and to restore McDuff's parole. Granberry says he never saw Jackson's letter and that McDuff's parole reinstatement was handled by the staff.
You want to see a letter?
Yeah. This apparently was referred to Betty Wells and did not come to me. And that happened an awful lot.
It's addressed to you?
Oh, I know it.
It says, "Dear Jim."
I know it, but that doesn't mean a thing.
1 month later, in December of 1990, the parole board staff reinstated McDuff's parole. Shortly after his release, Channel 8 has learned that a joint venture involving McDuff and the Jacksons unsuccessfully tried to negotiate a movie contract worth as much as $250,000. Plans for a movie remain in the works. But with McDuff's indictment on 2 capital murder charges, the end of that movie may have to be rewritten. Robert Riggs, Channel 8 News.
Today, Governor Ann Richards praised Channel 8's investigative reports on the McDuff parole, saying it points out the need for a complete overhaul. Our investigation continues next week.
told him I was not an attorney and that I certainly couldn't guarantee any results, and would try to help them if I could.
There was an inmate.
But there's nothing wrong with that.
The former chairman of the Texas Parole Board has worked as a parole consultant to get at least one killer and a drug dealer set free.
Good evening. Chip Moody has the night off. I'm John McKay. We continue our 2-month investigation into the Texas parole system.
A half dozen former parole commissioners and parole board members now, in effect, lobby for the release of inmates. Some inmates believe one of the most influential of the so-called parole consultants is former parole board chairman James Granberry. Last week, Governor Ann Richards called on the Travis County District Attorney to investigate consultant practices, and Granberry's state financial records have been subpoenaed. Robert Riggs reports in a continuing series from a 2-month News 8 investigation of the state parole system.
James Granberry became a parole consultant after he resigned from the parole board under fire last year. Granberry, who wielded great power as chairman, began contacting board members and staff to try to win the release of inmates. And some board members heard reports that an inmate was passing out Granberry's new business cards inside the prison walls.
When you left the board, you became a consultant, and you had some inmates pass your cards out in the prison.
I'm told that happened too, but I don't know how that came about.
How would an inmate get your cards?
I have no idea.
They were out soliciting business.
No, not at all. I don't know how that happened, but I was told that story.
Granberry says he handled a few cases and is not doing it anymore. One inmate's family received a proposed $5,000 contract for Granberry's consulting services with an attached note written on his old parole board memo pad. In late April of this year, Granberry wrote the parole board this letter asking for information on behalf of 4 inmates, including a convicted killer and a drug dealer.
Well, I'd rather not discuss those the people I represent, because I'm not going to represent any of them anymore, and I'm out of that business.
But you wouldn't have done the assaultive felons, the murderers, violent. You wouldn't have handled cases like that, not with your record.
But Granberry has contacted the parole board about the case of Tommy Wayne Dunn of Houston at least 4 times since last November. Dunn is serving a life sentence for paying a hitman $1,800 to kill his father in 1981. Harris County prosecutors opposed Dunn's parole, writing that this was a cold-blooded, premeditated crime of pure jealousy and greed. After the board turned down Dunn for parole 3 times, Granberry asked for a special review of the case in February. The board denied Granberry's request to reconsider setting the killer free.
It's a personal relationship, and I don't want to go into that. It wouldn't be appropriate, I don't think.
How would he know to come to you?
I have no idea.
For help?
I have no idea.
I mean,
I didn't solicit it. I'll say that.
So he just...
I get calls every day still from people.
From families asking?
Absolutely, and I'll say, look, I probably average probably 5 to 10 calls a month. People who maybe contacted me or worked with me when I was chairman and still won't say, can you help? And I said, no, look, I just cannot. And I'll try to give them some advice and move on with it.
But the mother of a Dallas inmate who wishes to remain anonymous says Granberry left a message on her telephone answering machine in late 1991 saying he could expedite her son's parole. His mother says Granberry later told her husband he wanted $1,500 to work on the case. The inmate was in the Dallas County Jail awaiting transfer to state prison. He was eligible for a program called Parole in Absentia, or PIA. The PIA program releases prisoners convicted of nonviolent crimes straight out of county jail because of prison overcrowding.
The family was concerned as to how this fellow got a hold of the information that he had on the client.
Richard Zadina, a former Dallas County prosecutor, had represented the inmate on his criminal charge.
It wasn't a situation where the family was going to him, it was him going to the family, contacting the family.
Did it strike you as improper, inappropriate, unusual?
Yes. Yes, it's like in the practice of law, attorneys are not supposed to be out chasing ambulances or chasing cases.
Your client who was imprisoned had a different last name from that of his parents, but yet out of the blue, his parents get a call from Mr. Granberry. Did it appear that Mr. Granberry had inside information to make that call?
Yes, I don't know. I'm not aware of any other way. that he would have been able to contact the client's family and have the information that he had without having some contact inside the state system.
Based on Zadina's advice, the family did not hire Granberry, and their son got out through the PIA program. Granberry's parole consulting reputation is apparently well known in the state prison system.
How did you know to contact him?
I heard about him through someone here.
Another inmate? Or
Yes, sir.
What? I mean, how do you hear about that kind of thing?
Someone heard that I was having a problem and said that this is an individual that might be able to help you.
Jerry Mudd, a former Dallas insurance salesman, is serving 3 concurrent 16-year sentences for bilking investors out of $9 million in 1987. While behind bars at the Diagnostic Prison Unit in Huntsville, Mudd says he hired Granberry to correct a computer error about his release date. Mudd's son says his father asked him to give Granberry $1,000 to see that Mudd got put into a pre-parole transfer center in Mineral Wells. Another $1,000 payment was to be made when Mudd was released. Mudd got transferred to the minimum security pre-parole center, but when he was on the verge of getting out of it, Mudd was sent back to Huntsville. Mudd and his son say they have been unable to get any answers from the parole board. They say Granberry was extremely helpful.
There are people here that have honest concerns and problems but have nowhere to turn. Maybe if we could get, some help directly from the parole board and things were handled on an even keel.
You wouldn't need to hire a consultant.
You wouldn't need to.
Is it appropriate for you to go through that revolving door and one day take off the hat as board chairman, a very powerful position, and the next day taking money to represent inmates to try to help them get out?
Not a very powerful position, I'll tell you that. Yeah, well, it's not unethical and it's not illegal, but I'm choosing not to do it anymore.
Robert Riggs, Channel 8 News.
No, I just...
And Robert continues his investigation into the parole system next week. Former Texas Parole Board Chairman James Granberry has been subpoenaed to appear tomorrow before a Senate investigating committee. Granberry was the key vote in paroling suspected serial killer Kenneth McDuff. We first told you about it in an exclusive 2-month-long News 8 investigation on McDuff's parole. Tomorrow, the committee will question Granberry under oath about his parole consulting business. Here's the latest from Channel 8's Robert Riggs.
A killer, drug dealer, child molester, and swindler are among the Texas prison inmates that have hired former parole board chairman James Granberry to get them out. Granberry set up business as a parole consultant after Governor Ann Richards forced him to resign from the board last year. Granberry began in effect lobbying his old colleagues on the board to free his clients for fees ranging between $1,000 and $2,000. Granberry's parole consulting business is now under investigation by the Travis County District Attorney and a Senate committee.
Is it appropriate for you to go through that revolving door and one day take off the hat as board chairman, a very powerful position, and the next day taking money to represent inmates to try to help them get out?
Not a very powerful position, I'll tell you that. Yeah, well, it's not unethical and it's not illegal, but I'm choosing not to do it anymore.
Because of his former parole chairmanship, Granberry had a reputation with some inmates that he held the key to freedom. Shortly after leaving the board, inmates in Huntsville's Wynn Prison Unit and down the road in the Diagnostic Prison Unit began passing out Granberry's business cards.
When you left the board, you became a consultant, and you had some inmates pass your cards out in the prison.
I'm told that happened too, but I don't know how it happened.
How would an inmate get your cards?
I have no idea.
They were out soliciting business?
No, not at all. I don't know how that happened, but I was told that story.
Some inmates say a parole officer working in the prison system referred them to Granberry. In this letter, received by some inmates just a few days after Granberry left the parole board, Granberry writes, "A mutual friend of ours told me that you might desire representation in securing your parole. If you would like for me to review your case to determine whether I might be able to help you, please write to me, or you may want a member of your family to contact me." And Granberry ends the letter by stating, "I'm enclosing a couple of my cards for your use."
It's totally unethical for him to do that. It's something that we're going to change. The law is going to be changed so that these people who serve on the Board of Pardons and Paroles can't go out and make vast sums of money.
Senator Ted Lyon plans to grill Granberry in hearings on Friday about his role in releasing suspected serial killer Kenneth McDuff. Granberry abstained from one vote because of a long personal friendship with McDuff's attorney. But 2 weeks later, Granberry cast the crucial vote that set McDuff free. Lyon believes Granberry violated parole board rules on conflicts of interest.
Granberry failed to show up for the last hearing held by the Senate Criminal Justice Committee and has now been subpoenaed. The committee staff expects Granberry to take the Fifth Amendment against self-incrimination. Granberry refers all questions about the investigation to his attorney, who said no comment. Robert Riggs, Channel 8 News, Austin.
The committee suspects dozens of inmates have paid Granberry to help them get out of prison. Granberry claims it was only a few. Tomorrow, Granberry will have to answer that question under oath.
Former parole board chairman James Granberry takes the Fifth Amendment 16 times before a state Senate committee today. Last week, committee chairman Ted Lyon sent Texas Rangers out to serve Granberry with a subpoena. Channel 8's Robert Riggs first broke the story about how suspected serial killer Kenneth McDuff got Granberry's vote for parole. And he's with us now live from our Austin newsroom. Robert?
John, James Granberry was forced to resign from the parole board chairmanship last year. He then set up a parole consulting business in which he began lobbying his old friends on the board to release his new inmate clients. Well, Granberry clearly does not want to talk about his parole consulting business or his parole vote for Kenneth McDuff. This is the first time in more than a dozen years that a witness before a legislative committee has taken the fifth.
Have you ever tried to influence a board member to deny an inmate's parole because that inmate owed you money? That's for Mr. Granberry to assert his privilege.
Former parole board chairman James Granberry invoked the Fifth Amendment against self-incrimination 16 times. He refused to answer questions about his parole consulting business or his vote to free suspected serial killer Kenneth McDuff. Granberry came to the Senate Criminal Justice Committee under subpoena and flanked by lawyers. A prosecutor from the Travis County District Attorney's Office, which is investigating Granberry, also came to listen. But Granberry's attorney did all the talking.
Dr. Granberry will not cooperate in this circus and will not assist this committee in its fishing expedition.
Granberry's attorney made it clear that his client would not talk unless the committee granted immunity. In 1989, Granberry abstained from voting on Kenneth McDuff's parole because of a long personal friendship with McDuff's attorney. But just 2 weeks later, Granberry cast the crucial vote that freed McDuff. McDuff allegedly started a killing spree of young women 4 days after being paroled. 2 months ago, Granberry admitted in an interview with Channel 8 News that he could have kept McDuff behind bars.
I guess I could if I'd voted the other way. We could have stopped it. But I don't have a crystal ball, and I didn't know what the fellow was going to do. In my opinion, he'd be a useful citizen.
Now questioned by the committee about McDuff, Granberry takes the fifth.
Did you violate the conflict of interest policy in voting on Kenneth McDuff's release as a member of the Administrative Review Panel? I instruct him to assert his privilege.
Granberry also refused to turn over the list of inmates that he's trying to get out of prison. In that interview back in June, Granberry claimed to us that he didn't represent any violent offenders, but we have learned that his inmate client list includes a killer and child molester. John.
Okay, thanks a lot, Robert.
This is News 8 at 6.
Channel 8 News has learned that the U.S. Attorney in Waco is investigating former parole board chairman James Granberry. Good evening. A series of News 8 exclusive reports in June revealed that Granberry cast the crucial vote that freed suspected serial killer Kenneth McDuff.
Granberry voted in the case despite a long-standing personal friendship with McDuff's attorney. Channel 8's Robert Riggs first broke that story about McDuff's parole and the influence of parole consultants. He joins us now live from our Austin newsroom with more. Robert?
Gloria, the federal investigation of Granberry started in the wake of our reports about his parole board vote to free convicted killer Kenneth McDuff. Granberry was a Lubbock orthodontist and former mayor when Republican Governor Bill Clements appointed him to the parole board in 1989. As the board's powerful chairman, he wielded great power in deciding which inmates got out of prison.
A federal grand jury in Waco is investigating former parole board chairman James Granberry. FBI agents, aided by state prison investigators, have questioned dozens of inmates about their relationship with Granberry. The investigation focuses on Granberry's activities during his 2 years on the parole board and his subsequent business as a parole consultant.
Have you been helped by any of the staff at the Board of Pardons and Paroles in obtaining information on clients or potential clients in order to solicit them to pay you money to help get them out of prison?
I instruct Mr. Granberry to assert his privilege.
Granberry took the Fifth Amendment against self-incrimination 16 times before the Senate Criminal Justice Committee in September. Senator Ted Lyon originally launched an investigation into allegations of influence peddling at the parole board and Granberry's role in freeing convicted killer Kenneth McDuff.
I think the system was as corrupt as it could be, and Jim Granberry was at the top of it. And he deserves a lot of the blame for some of these people that have gotten out, that have gone on and killed other people, such as McDuff.
After being forced to resign from the board chairmanship in May of 1991, Granberry became a parole consultant. Granberry, in effect, began lobbying his old colleagues on the parole board to release his convict clients. Inmates in state prisons began drumming up customers for Granberry after he sent them business cards to pass out. At least one inmate's family received a contract from Granberry with a bill for his consulting fee written on a parole board memo pad.
Is that appropriate to be using your old memo pads?
I don't even have any of those anymore.
No?
You see, this just says board member.
Right.
Yeah.
How would they have
I
that?
don't have any idea.
They said you mailed it to. Came with some contractual stuff that explained you weren't an attorney, that you do you send out stuff like that?
Yeah, those few cases I did early on, yes, I did. Make sure that I'm not an attorney. Told them I was not an attorney and that I certainly couldn't guarantee any results, and would try to help them if I could.
There was an inmate.
But there's nothing wrong with that.
Investigators have questioned inmates' families and attorneys to determine if Granberry used inside information to solicit business. Channel 8 reported last June that the family of a Dallas inmate received an unsolicited call from Granberry offering to get their son out of the Dallas County Jail for $1,500. They have told the federal investigation that Granberry said he could exercise his influence as former board chairman to get their son released through a program called PIA, or Parole in Absentia. Other inmates have told investigators that they believe they were denied parole because they wouldn't make additional payments to Granberry.
Investigators have questioned numerous employees at the Austin headquarters of the Parole Division and have reviewed hundreds of inmates' files. Sources say staff involvement in paroling inmates is also under investigation. Granberry's attorney was not available for comment. We'll have more reports on a growing scandal in the parole system during the coming weeks. Gloria?
Thank you, Robert.
The two children of slain convenience store clerk Melissa Northrup will receive $16 million over the lifetime of the settlement with Quick Pack. The big dollar settlement puts the convenience store industry on notice to install security equipment and screen employees. 22-year-old Northrup was abducted and murdered while working the midnight shift on March 1st of this year. Kenneth McDuff, a suspected serial killer, has been charged with the capital murder of Northrup and a Fort Worth woman. McDuff briefly worked at the same Quick Pack and was trained by Northrup's husband.
Well, I just wondered why on earth anybody would hire someone like this and expose their employees to them.
Quick Pack hired McDuff while he was on parole for a brutal murder committed in 1966. McDuff lied on his job application, stating he had never been convicted of a felony. The 9 convenience stores operated by Dameron Oil did not run criminal background checks. They only cost $25. In a videotaped deposition, a Quick Pack supervisor admitted that the stores could be hiring cutthroats and murderers.
Here's a man who had been sentenced to be executed in the state of Texas, and that sentence had been commuted to life, and then he'd been paroled twice. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to do a background check that shows Kenneth McDuff is not somebody you want working in a convenience store.
Northrup worked the graveyard shift alone at the Quick Pack store located south of Waco on busy Interstate 35. A security camera and silent alarm had been removed. 1 month before her murder, Northrop asked a manager to install a door buzzer to alert her when customers entered. It never was.
Some of McDuff's alleged victims would prefer to sue the parole board and parole division staff for releasing an inmate with such a murderous criminal history. But state law makes it nearly impossible to hold state officials accountable for their actions in court. Robert Riggs, Channel 8 News, Waco.
Tonight, News 8 continues a 6-month-long investigation into the Texas parole system. In June, we reported details of how serial killer Kenneth McDuff was paroled. Now, a federal grand jury is investigating the entire Texas parole system. And in our News 8 investigation, we have learned that McDuff is not unique among the number of violent inmates who have been paroled. Tonight, Channel 8's Robert Riggs uncovers the story that top prison and parole officials do not want told. It's the story of the meanest inmates who are now free to kill.
What you are watching is a contract killing in a Texas prison. A knife-wielding prison gang member butchers another inmate. Life among the meanest of the mean is captured by a guard's camera. If the savagery shocks you, consider the fact that Texas prisons secretly turned loose more than 1,700 of its troublemakers. Hundreds were freed from the tightest security cell blocks like this one.
I think most of them are just violent, antisocial behavior people that shouldn't be walking the streets. They're dangerous people.
Violent inmates were released from the darkest cell blocks of maximum security prisons called administrative segregation. Administrative segregation is a prison within a prison. Dangerous inmates are kept caged apart in single cells like pit bulls. The public has never seen a so-called ADSEG unit. It's so dangerous, our camera was not allowed inside. This video obtained from prison sources shows how gang members and violent inmates are kept locked down 23 hours a day. They're not even allowed out to eat meals. Most contact with the outside world passes through a small slot in a heavily barred door. They are strip-searched and handcuffed for short trips to the shower or recreation yard. 2 guards must escort a single inmate behind a sliding shield. That's for protection from stabbings with makeshift weapons called shanks.
Between 1988 and 1991, prison and parole division officials freed dangerous inmates ineligible for release in order to prevent prison overcrowding. Parole division officials have refused our request for on-camera interviews. The Texas Department of Criminal Justice has blocked our request for a list of the inmates under the Open Records Act. But we have uncovered a bloody trail of violence.
When was the last time you got broken into?
Matt Hurden's mother was the victim of a dangerous inmate who was released too soon. Hurden is a crime scene investigator for the San Antonio Police Department. 2 years ago, a paroled auto thief stole the life of 79-year-old Agnes Hurden.
The alarm, of course, woke my mother up and startled her, and she sat up in bed. We're assuming that she made some kind of command to him, like to get out of the house or something, because obviously he didn't. He went around her bed and pulled out a hunting knife and stabbed her approximately 6 times, according to the medical examiner.
23-year-old Steve Rodriguez killed Agnes Hurden for a TV and a stereo. In prison, he belonged to the Mexican Mafia, the most violent gang in Texas. According to these confidential parole records, Rodriguez broke nearly 24 major rules in prison. He struck a guard, fought inmates, created disturbances, refused to obey orders, refused to work, and was caught twice sniffing paint thinner to get high.
During Rodriguez's murder trial, a senior parole analyst testified that a number of inmates in disciplinary status were released to meet a daily quota. The parole board was under intense pressure to release 150 inmates a day to prevent prison overcrowding, even if it meant releasing inmates who could not get along in the prison world, much less the free world.
Parole board members Stennett Posey and Winona Miles approved Rodriguez's parole after only reading his file. Posey and Miles refused to talk on camera. If Posey and Miles had tried to interview Rodriguez, they would have found him in solitary confinement. They claim there was nothing in Rodriguez's criminal or social history to indicate violence. 2 months after Rodriguez was approved for parole, he stabbed another inmate during a prison fight. 8 inmates were injured, 4 hospitalized. A second parole panel of Hub Bechtel and Henry Keene, apparently unaware of the attempted murder, also approved Rodriguez for parole. He was not supposed to be released until he earned back 2 years of lost good conduct time credits on his sentence. But the prison system and parole division staff ignored parole board orders. Rodriguez was released. 5 months later, he killed Agnes Herden.
They just as well signed my mother's death certificate when they granted him release.
This is somebody who can't get along in the prison world, much less the free world. Now, how can they be turned loose without it being a risk, a major risk to the public?
They can't.
Parole Board Chairman Jack Kyle stopped the releases of prison troublemakers shortly after his appointment by Governor Ann Richards in September 1991. Kyle says he met stiff opposition from the prison system.
Did you get any explanation of why we were dipping into the worst of the worst, in a sense, inside the prison?
The only explanation I can give you is the one that they've had, apparently it's the #1 rule of thumb for about the last 4 or 5 years, and that is move somebody out so you can move somebody else in.
The prison system and parole division played a deadly game of musical chairs with the most violent inmates.
Every time I have a thought about my mother, whether it was in my childhood or in my adulthood, and it was a good thought, I always have to end it with the thought she was murdered. And that's what's going to happen to all these releases. Somewhere eventually it's going to happen to another family.
Robert Riggs, Channel 8 News.
Anderson County District Attorney Jeff Harrington says Rodriguez should never have been released. He should have been tried for attempted murder of the other inmate. But he says it took 14 months for the Special Prison Prosecutor's Office to indict Rodriguez. The charges were filed long after Rodriguez had been released and had murdered Agnes Herden. Tomorrow we'll look at how the former chairman of the Texas Parole Board got a convicted drug dealer out of jail in our continuing investigation, Free to Kill. West Texas law officers say former parole board chairman James Granberry intervened to get a convicted drug dealer out of jail.
Last June, we reported Granberry cast the crucial vote freeing suspected serial killer Kenneth McDuff. Granberry voted on the case despite a close personal relationship with McDuff's attorney. Since the broadcast of our exclusive News 8 investigation, the U.S. Attorney and a federal grand jury in Waco have launched a probe into the Texas parole system. Tonight, Channel 8's Robert Riggs unveils new information about allegations Granberry gave special favors to a convicted speed dealer.
James Granberry owns this $425,000 home in Lubbock. Its 5 bedrooms, 9 baths, pool, cabana, and guest house require expensive upkeep.
When a person is paroled,
shortly after he became the powerful chairman of the parole board in January 1990, Granberry needed some work done on his house. These were some of his handymen, drug dealers out of prison on parole. Paul Scott has been convicted on federal and state drug charges. Scott was a longtime employee of Granberry's. Granberry tried unsuccessfully to get Scott a pardon. Scott asked Granberry to help Kenneth Ray Johnson. Johnson had violated parole. He was a wanted man on the run. His friends call him Skeet. He's better known for cooking methamphetamine drugs called speed. Fellow drug dealer Jackie Summerford says Johnson paid $500 to Scott and worked on Granberry's house to get out of trouble.
Granberry was getting ready to sell his house and move, and Scott had promised him that there'd be work done to his home, and that Skeet was this kind of carpenter that he could do the work to the house, and that's what Paul told me. He said, well, I made a promise to Granberry that all these guys he's helping out are going to help do the work to his house, and if they don't, then he's going to be mad.
The supervisor of the Lubbock Parole Office got a call from Granberry about Skeet Johnson in late January of 1990. Granberry wanted to withdraw the arrest warrant for Johnson's parole violation. It was an unusual request because Johnson was not in custody.
We was bound and determined we're going to get our man. You know,
Deputy Gordon Bohannon had been hunting for Skeet Johnson. West Texas law officers had begun to hear from drug informants that even if they did arrest Johnson, he wouldn't be behind bars very long.
This guy, he's tried to run over a police officer. And in the state of Texas, you know, especially over here, we're not going to tolerate it.
2 days after Granberry tried to get him off the hook, Johnson led Hockley County Sheriff's deputies on a 100-mile-per-hour chase. Johnson destroyed part of an oil pump jack as he tried to escape across a cotton field. Officers arrested Johnson. He was supposed to go back to prison for violating parole. But Granberry intervened again. He and another parole board member withdrew the arrest warrant, which is called a blue warrant. Johnson went back to dealing drugs.
Did you ever pull blue warrants on some parolees?
Written back when we had the...
They were friends or you knew or
not unless it was a favor? Not unless it's some reason to do it. That's final reasons. And we had the power at one time to do that. We don't anymore. I think the board member should.
According to sources inside the Division of Pardons and Paroles, these allegations were reported by the Lubbock Parole Office in March of 1990. An investigation by the Internal Affairs Unit of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice found that Granberry violated 5 of the parole board's rules and regulations.
Mr. Granberry doesn't wish to speak.
Granberry was interviewed by investigators in April of 1990. He admitted that Paul Scott probably pocketed $500 from Johnson. Granberry denied that Johnson re-roofed his house. But last June, Granberry claimed there was no investigation.
Did they ever confront you with allegations?
Never.
Nothing?
Never.
Did you ever hear that they had allegations that there were parolees doing work on your house here?
No, not at all.
Johnson told his parole officers that he was hired to re-roof Granberry's Lubbock home and did plumbing work and cut down trees. But later, Johnson told law enforcement officers that he had worked off his parole at Granberry's house.
Granberry apparently never got a slap on the wrist for violating rules. A former investigator for Internal Affairs says the investigation was hushed up. Deputy Bohannon says the investigation of Granberry quietly died.
He's the chairman of Paroles and Pardons. He's supposed to be on our side. You know, he's supposed to be on the side of us fighting these type of people and not showing special interest in them.
I recall investigating something on Granberry, but I don't recall the details.
James Lineau should know what happened to the investigation of Granberry. Lineau is the executive director of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. Internal Affairs reports directly to him.
Did your agency find any that Mr. Granberry had violated any rules and regulations?
I don't recall. I really don't.
I mean, something as serious involving the parole board chairman, if there was a finding that he violated rules and regulations, you as executive director wouldn't remember that?
If it was serious, I would remember it.
If he had parolees working at his home and he was pulling blue warrants on parolees, would that not be serious?
To have a parolee working in his home, no, that would not necessarily be serious.
What about pulling blue warrants of parolees?
That would be.
A few minutes later, in a meeting with Governor Ann Richards, Lineau recalled the investigation of Granberry. According to the governor's chief of staff, Lineau said it was part of an ongoing 2-year investigation in which his office is assisting the U.S. Attorney in Waco.
Contrary to what Lineau told the governor, we have learned that the investigation of James Granberry was closed more than 2 years ago in May of 1990. Those Hockley County deputies have been left to wonder why Granberry did special favors for a man on the wrong side of the law and why the investigation was halted. Chip?
Robert, let me ask you this. Last night you reported that the state prison system secretly released more than 1,700 prison troublemakers. Any official reaction to that today?
The governor's office was very concerned by the report. She tells me that she has asked the chairman of the parole board and her top criminal justice aide to investigate along with the prison board.
Allegations of parole selling shook the foundation of the Texas criminal justice system today.
Former parole board chairman James Granberry is accused of accepting 2 cars in exchange for the parole of an inmate. The federal charge by the U.S. Attorney in Waco follows a 6-month investigation of the parole system by Channel 8's Robert Riggs.
Freedom-hungry inmates in Texas prisons hired former parole board chairman James Granberry to help them get out early. The federal charge alleges Granberry committed 3 counts of perjury when asked about his parole consulting in court testimony. A 3-time child molester is among 22 inmates who paid Granberry fees ranging between $500 and $2,000.
We've alleged he lied in 3 instances, and it related to his role as a consultant. He entirely misrepresented that he was acting as a consultant at that time, the number of clients he had, and so forth.
According to the federal charge, Granberry worked actively at the parole consulting business from May of 1991 when he left the parole board until last summer. In an interview last June, 6 days before the court testimony, Granberry claimed he was out of the parole consulting business.
Is it appropriate for you to go through that revolving door and one day take off the hat as board chairman, a very powerful position, and the next day be taking money to represent inmates to try to help them get out?
Not a very powerful position, I'll tell you that. Yeah, well, it's not unethical and it's not illegal, but I'm choosing not to do it anymore.
The federal charge alleges Granberry accepted a $500 check for parole consulting work after our interview and 3 days before testifying that he did not do that anymore. The U.S. Attorney alleges that Granberry used his past chairmanship of the parole board as a selling point on business cards.
When you left the board, you became a consultant, and you had some inmates pass your cards out in the prison.
I'm told that happened too. I don't know how that came about.
How would an inmate get your cards?
I have no idea.
They were out soliciting business.
No, not at all. I don't know how that happened, but I was told that story.
Granberry is also accused, while he was chairman in April 1990, of soliciting a bribe in the form of 2 new leased automobiles. Granberry allegedly received the cars from an unidentified Texas businessman after seeing that the businessman's son, who had been denied parole, was released.
The parole-selling allegations raise questions about whether other inmates have paid bribes to get out of prison early. A wide-ranging federal investigation continues into the Texas parole and prison systems. Robert Riggs, Channel 8 News, Waco.
The perjury charges carry a maximum penalty of 5 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. Granberry's attorney declined to comment on the allegations. Go ahead.
And another major story this evening, Channel 8 News has been investigating alleged corruption within the Texas parole system for 9 months now. In a new development, we've learned a prominent Dallas businessman became involved with former parole board chairman James Granberry, who then helped parole the man's son. Today, the embattled Granberry made his first appearance in federal court to face a bribery allegation. Channel 8's Robert Riggs has this exclusive investigation.
Mr. Granberry, did you solicit a bribe?
Former parole board chairman James Granberry tried to slip out of the U.S. courthouse in Waco, where he faces perjury charges. Granberry is also accused of soliciting a bribe to release the imprisoned son of a Texas businessman. According to federal charges, the inmate's father helped Granberry obtain 2 new leased cars. Channel 8 News has learned that Carl Westcott of Dallas helped Granberry lease a pair of cars in July 1990. Shortly after his son was approved for early parole. Westcott had no comment. Carl Westcott is a former auto dealer and now runs Westcott Communications, a pioneer in satellite television networks for business. Thousands of police officers across the country receive news and information from Westcott's law enforcement training network. In 1983, Carl Westcott's son, Gary, was sentenced to a 25-year sentence for murder with a deadly weapon.
It was just a cold-blooded murder. Just a flat-out, cold-blooded murder.
Smith County District Attorney Jack Skeen tried to keep Gary Westcott behind bars. Skeen strongly protested efforts to parole Westcott.
According to police reports, 10 years ago this month, Gary Westcott was thrown out of this Tyler nightclub after he got into a fight with a bouncer. Westcott came back armed with a shotgun. He drove into the parking lot and fired 3 blasts at the front door. He mortally wounded an innocent bystander. 22-year-old Michael Stevenson died here in his brother's arms. The killing deeply wounded Stevenson's family. He never saw Michael Jr.'s first birthday. Stevenson's brother has suffered 3 nervous breakdowns.
It's been really hard to figure out why. I just feel like we arrived at the wrong place at the wrong time that night, and this guy didn't care who it was because the witnesses, his next door neighbor and his girlfriend testified against him and said he had told them that he was going to go out there if that happened and kill him a nigger.
Westcott was first denied parole on February 14, 1990, after DA Jack Skeen protested. Westcott wasn't supposed to be considered for parole again for nearly 2 years. But less than 2 months after the denial, then Parole Board Chairman James Granberry voted to override the denial.
There was a distinct effort made to parole him at the earliest possible time.
Granberry, as chairman, controlled a secretive special review process. He had appointed board members Frank Eichenberg and Troy Fox to hear cases. 3 days after Westcott was placed in special review, Eichenberg and Fox approved Westcott for parole a year and a half before he was legally eligible to leave prison. Eichenberg, who's a former state representative from Plano, and Fox both refused our request for on-camera interviews. Granberry obtained this new Pontiac Grand Am and a Toyota with Carl Westcott's help just 2 months after his son was approved for parole. The Toyota was used by the former secretary of a parole official. The owner of Autoflex Leasing in Richardson says Carl Westcott referred Granberry. Granberry couldn't get credit approval to lease the cars, so Westcott bought the cars from Autoflex Leasing, and Autoflex leased them to Granberry. Westcott's ownership was hidden. Autoflex says the titles were never transferred. Granberry paid $201 per month for each car on a 2-year lease. Autoflex says it was unaware that Westcott's son was in prison.
I would say that is extremely inappropriate, and I would be very offended by it because, frankly, I don't believe that justice in the case with him being paroled when he was resulted. I think he was paroled too soon and should have served a longer number of years in the penitentiary.
Carl Westcott's son walked out of prison on parole in October of 1991 after serving only 1/3 of a 25-year sentence for murder. Documents obtained by News 8 show that Gary Westcott has continued to get special treatment while on parole. Just 1 month after Westcott's release from prison, Parole Board member Frank Eichenberg asked his parole officer to allow Westcott to go to a posh resort in Vail, Colorado for a week-long family vacation. Our investigation found that Gary Westcott is one of dozens of inmates who were paroled after James Granberry placed their cases in special review. According to sources inside the parole division, an internal investigation looked at Granberry's handling of special review cases in the spring of 1991. But this marks the second state investigation in which nothing was done about allegations of wrongdoing against James Granberry. Robert Riggs, Channel 8 News, Tyler.
And Granberry was released on a $5,000 bond this morning. A federal judge ordered him not to do any parole consulting until he is arraigned on perjury charges.
Working in the spirit of Texas, from WFAA-TV, this is the News 8 Update.
You definitely would have to say he's a career-type criminal.
A police chase involving a Texas prison parolee ends up in a deadly pileup. The pursuit of an armed bank robber endangers lives on a crowded freeway. Then a head-on collision, and the carnage leaves one innocent man dead. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us.
The man arrested in today's robbery and wreck is Curtis Frank Brooks. Police describe him as a career criminal wanted in 4 states. Channel 8 News has learned that Curtis is a friend of paroled killer Kenneth McDuff, and both got out of prison with a special vote from a former chairman of the Texas Parole Board, now under federal indictment. Today, police say Brooks robbed a bank in North Dallas in the 3600 block of Forest Lane. Then they say he fled in a stolen car and slammed head-on into traffic on Highway 183 near Texas Stadium. Channel 8's Robert Riggs reports.
A nationwide manhunt for a violent Texas parolee ended tragically for an innocent motorist in Irving. Incredibly, the convicted rapist who caused this deadly wreck is linked to the growing Texas parole scandal uncovered by News 8. 43-year-old Curtis Frank Brooks, an Arlington handyman and career criminal, apparently robbed a bank,
then led Dallas and Irving police on a high-speed chase.
I really didn't know what to think. I just some crazy guy out on the daggone road probably stole a car or something, but apparently he didn't steal a car, he stole more than that.
Brooks cut across the median of Highway 183 into the westbound lanes of oncoming traffic near Texas Stadium. He crashed a Lexus stolen in San Antonio last week into a car driven by 57-year-old John Genuine of DeSoto. The twisted wreckage pinned Genuine in the car. He died later at Parkland Hospital. The chase began after a pistol-wielding man robbed the Bank One office in the 3600 block of Forest Lane at 11 o'clock Friday morning. The gunman escaped with a bag full of cash.
There was a helicopter overhead advising him what the location was, and they had 2 or 3 Dallas squads directly behind him, and then we had a squad car that was trailing them.
Police saved Brooks from the burning Lexus and handcuffed him. Brooks was free on parole after serving less than 20 years of a 99-year life sentence. He had been convicted in 1970 of 5 rapes in Dallas, Tarrant, and Randall counties. In the past month alone, Brooks was wanted for 5 rapes marked by brutal beatings, 2 kidnappings, 7 armed robberies, and 1 home invasion. Brooks left the trail of terror through 7 Texas cities, beginning in Louisville on New Year's Day, and moving on to cities in 3 other states. Arlington police connected the crime wave to Brooks. The break in the case occurred when Brooks tried to abduct a woman from this condominium parking lot on January 21st. Her screams attracted attention. Brooks abandoned his pickup truck, which was parked by her car. That night, he is suspected of kidnapping a woman from this Arlington dry cleaner, stealing a car in Hearst, and raping an Irving woman.
There are some people who need to spend the rest of their life in prison, and a certain amount of people are being released that come back into society and begin preying on the communities like they did before they were sentenced.
Brooks bragged that he was a prison pal of parole killer Kenneth McDuff, according to law officers. McDuff is currently on trial for capital murder in Houston and a serial killer suspect. Brooks and McDuff's paroles have one thing in common. Former parole board chairman James Granberry cast key votes that set them free. Granberry has been the subject of an 8-month investigation by News 8. In its wake, the U.S. Attorney in Waco has charged Granberry with perjury and alleges he solicited a bribe to parole a Dallas murderer. Granberry used his power as parole board chairman to place Brooks' case in a secretive process called special review. Granberry and a fellow member approved Brooks' parole in April of 1990 over the protest of Brooks' victims. Arlington police say a local prison ministry was instrumental in getting Brooks out.
Well, it's been described to us that he was a born-again Christian, became a born-again Christian while he was serving his 20-year sentence. Based on his activities since the 1st of January, I'll let you be the judge of that.
Brooks is now in Parkland Hospital under guard by the FBI. News 8 has learned that Brooks violated his parole shortly after his release from prison, but his arrest warrant was withdrawn by the parole board. Now, police suspect Brooks may have committed dozens of other rapes and robberies in a 4-state rampage. Robert Riggs, Channel 8 News.
This is News 8 at 5.
Are you innocent, Mr. McDuff?
I'd like to get impartial trial.
You think you can get a fair trial here?
Don't look like that with all this news media.
Former death row inmate Kenneth McDuff speaks to reporters as he heads into a Houston courtroom to face charges of capital murder. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
McDuff's case is controversial because the former Texas death row inmate is accused of committing the murder while out on parole. The judge issued a gag order for both prosecutors and defense attorneys. But that didn't keep McDuff from talking to Channel 8's Robert Riggs, who joins us now live from Houston. Robert?
Chip, just how McDuff got out on parole is under investigation by a federal grand jury in Waco and the U.S. attorney there. This morning, as sheriff's deputies prepared to escort him to the Harris County Courthouse, a crowd gathered. A group of burly construction workers said they were going to yell insults. But when the parole killer appeared, a hushed, cold silence fell over the crowd.
46-year-old Kenneth McDuff disputed his reputation as a monstrous serial killer. The parole murderer insisted he's not guilty.
I'd like to get impartial trial.
You think you can get a fair trial here?
Don't look like that with all this news media. Just made me a scapegoat for all the crimes in Texas.
So you saying?
McDuff walked to court under heavy guard. He sent a shiver of fear through crime victim groups monitoring the trial. They say McDuff symbolizes a fatally flawed parole system.
Seeing him is like an aura of evil, the epitome of a failed system, the epitome of a broken, archaic criminal justice system.
McDuff's notoriety from a nationwide manhunt caused the trial to be moved from Waco to Houston. McDuff's alleged killing spree began just 4 days after he was set free in late 1989.
Well, not only has something been stolen from my life, my mother has been stolen from 2 children.
Brenda Solomon remembers her daughter Melissa Northrup as a tough little girl who tried to provide for her 2 children. Northrup was pregnant and had reconciled with her husband after a short separation. She was scared working the midnight shift alone at this quick pack on Interstate 35 south of Waco. McDuff is accused of kidnapping her from the convenience store last March. He briefly worked there before Northrup and would have been aware of lax security. Northrup's body and abandoned car were later found in a southeast Dallas County gravel pit.
I'd hope to at least find out why. You know, why was it my wife? Why was it anybody's wife? And just basically, why did it have to happen at all?
Northrup's husband, Aaron, trained McDuff for his clerk's job at Quick Pack. He says McDuff once complimented Melissa as pretty. McDuff did not appear threatening. Aaron Northrup passed him off as a strange nerd. McDuff never hinted he was a parole killer. Both Northrup's husband and mother want to see McDuff executed.
Then I think that we will really be able to get on with our lives. Because as long as he lives, even though he's in prison, he's still a part of our life. If he's not around, I mean, if he's dead and gone, that part's over.
Jury selection in the murder trial is expected to last 2 to 3 weeks. The McLennan County prosecutor says that the problems in the parole system can't be fixed in this courthouse. That's a problem for lawmakers meeting at the State House in Austin starting tomorrow. Chip?
All right, Robert, thank you very much.
This is News 8 at 5.
I think the evidence is going to show you in this case that there were only 2 people who were the witnesses to the death of Melissa Ann Northrup, one being Melissa Ann Northrup, and the second, I believe the evidence will show, is Kenneth Allen McDuff.
We don't agree with that, and we don't agree that the state can prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt.
Opening statements in the capital murder trial of Kenneth Allen McDuff, a former death row prisoner. Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us.
Kenneth McDuff is charged with abducting, robbing, and killing Melissa Northrup, a pregnant Waco convenience store worker, in 1991. Because of pretrial publicity in the case, the trial has been moved to Houston. That's where Channel 8's Robert Riggs is right now. Robert?
John, Kenneth McDuff showed little emotion here today in the courtroom. He would stare away, look down at the table as there was testimony from the family of his alleged victim. McDuff pled not guilty at the start of the trial to capital murder charges, and on his way into the courtroom, McDuff says he wants to take the stand in his defense. Kenneth McDuff went to trial for the second time in his life to face a possible death penalty. The parole killer in the murder of 3 teenagers in 1966 has become a frightening symbol of a fatally flawed parole system. McDuff is accused of the kidnapped murder of 22-year-old Melissa Northrup of Waco. The pregnant mother of 2 children was abducted last March from an I-35 convenience store. She worked the midnight shift alone. McDuff had been a clerk there on the same shift months earlier. In his opening argument, the McLennan County District Attorney told the jury that circumstantial evidence will prove McDuff killed Northrup, and that on the night of Northrup's disappearance, McDuff bragged that he was going to rob and kill somebody. McDuff needed money to buy crack cocaine that evening. More than $250 was missing from the cash drawer, and the prosecutor says McDuff knew from working at the Quick Pack that there was no security.
And he will bring you evidence to show how he said it would be easy to wait for the single attendant to come outside, to bash him in the head, and to take all the money in the store. We will bring you a witness who says that Kenneth McDuff discussed with him how he was going to rob the Quick Pack 8.
What you will see before you in the next 2 weeks may well rank as one of the most inept, one of the most bungled, one of the most error-prone criminal investigations in the history of the state.
McDuff's attorney urged the jury not to make their decision based on public fear, hysteria, and hatred for McDuff. The trial is expected to last 3 weeks. John?
Well, Robert, are there any special witnesses expected to testify in this trial?
Well, the prosecution announced today that they are going to call Addie McDuff, the elderly mother of Kenneth McDuff. They want to talk to her about a Visa credit card that she had given McDuff and that he had used on the day that Northrop disappeared. It's a critical element in the case to prove the whereabouts of McDuff. I am told that when she was served with a subpoena up in Temple that she flew into a rage and began accusing the U.S. Marshals in Waco, who led the manhunt for McDuff, of bombarding her house with bright lights and changing the hot and cold water faucets in their home. John?
Okay, thanks a lot, Robert.
Roy Duncan and Dale Benson. This is News 8 at 6.
My client would like to enter a plea of not guilty.
Attorneys for paroled killer Kenneth McDuff say their client did not kill a Waco convenience store clerk.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Tracy has the night off. Testimony got underway today in Kenneth McDuff's murder trial in a Houston courtroom. And Channel 8's Robert Riggs is following that trial and joins us now live. Robert?
Gloria, the court recessed a few minutes ago, but throughout the day, McDuff sat steely-eyed in court, and that expression never changed. The mother of his alleged victim broke into tears, choked back tears, as she had to identify the purse of her slain daughter. But McDuff never looked up at her. 46-year-old Kenneth McDuff says he wants to take the stand in his defense. The parole killer faces the death penalty for the second time in his life. The capital murder trial was moved to a Houston court because of publicity about the notorious case. In opening arguments, the McLennan County District Attorney told the jury that circumstantial evidence will prove McDuff killed a Waco convenience store clerk last March.
There were only two people who were the witnesses to the death of Melissa Ann Northrop, one being Melissa Ann Northrop, and the second, I believe the evidence will show, is Kenneth Allen McDuff.
The suspected serial killer is charged with abducting and murdering Melissa Northrop. The 22-year-old pregnant mother of two children disappeared from a Quick Pack store on Interstate 35 south of Waco. Northrop worked the midnight shift alone. McDuff had also worked the same shift months earlier. The prosecutor told the jury that McDuff knew there was no security, and on the evening of Northrop's disappearance, McDuff needed money to buy crack cocaine.
He told people that evening that all he wanted was some crack and a woman. And on another occasion, I think the evidence will show that he told people that he was going to kill and rob somebody that night.
McDuff's defense attorney urged the jury not to be swayed by public fear and hysteria. He says the criminal investigation of Northrop's murder may rank as the most bungled and inept in Texas history.
It is rife with contradiction. It is rife with gaps. It is replete with mistakes. And it is replete with judgments made not according to evidence, but according to prejudice and hatred of one man, Kenneth Allen McDuff.
It will be the defense strategy for McDuff to try to knock holes in the quality of the investigation throughout this 3-week trial. And I can tell you that law enforcement sources familiar with the investigation say they too are concerned that it has been hastily put together. I'm Robert Riggs, live in Houston.
All right, thanks a lot, Robert.
Of Texas, from WFAA-TV, this is the News 8 Update.
My client would like to enter a plea of not guilty.
Former death row inmate Kenneth McDuff goes on trial for a murder committed while he was out on parole.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us. Tracy is off tonight. Kenneth Allen McDuff is on trial in Houston for one of a string of murders in which he is the prime suspect. Law enforcement officers believe McDuff went on a killing spree shortly after he was released from prison in late 1989. A News 8 investigation of McDuff's release from prison has led to federal charges against the former state parole board chairman. Channel 8's Robert Riggs has more on all this now from Houston.
46-year-old Kenneth McDuff did not cast the sinister image of the sadistic serial killer of young women. McDuff wore a dark business suit and stylish tie to mark the second time He has been tried on the death penalty. McDuff was paroled 2 years ago after serving 23 years for murder. He was accused in 1966 of kidnapping, rape, and murder in the deaths of 3 Fort Worth teenagers. Now he's back in court again.
You told people that evening that all he wanted was some crack and a woman. And on another occasion, I think the evidence will show that he told people that he was going to kill and rob somebody that night. And he invited
The McLennan County District Attorney told a Houston jury that circumstantial evidence will prove McDuff killed Melissa Northrup. The 22-year-old pregnant mother of 2 children vanished last March, along with more than $250 from the cash drawer of the convenience store where she clerked. The petite Northrup worked the midnight shift at Quick Pack Store number 8 on a lonely stretch of Interstate 35 south of Waco. McDuff had briefly worked the same shift there before quitting months earlier.
We will bring you a witness who says that Kenneth McDuff discussed with him how he was going to rob the Quick Pack 8, and then how the best way to dispose of a body was to tie them up, weight their feet, and gut their stomach so they wouldn't float.
Northrup's partially clad body was found 2 months later in a water-filled gravel pit in Dallas County. In court, McDuff came face-to-face with the family of his alleged victim. Northrup's mother choked back tears as she identified her slain daughter's purse and other personal belongings that are evidence. McDuff gazed down with his steely eyes. His defense attorney urged the jury not to be swayed by the public's fear, hysteria, and hatred of Kenneth McDuff.
What you have before you today and what you will see before you in the next 2 weeks may well rank as one of the most inept, one of the most bungled, one of the most error-prone criminal investigations in the history of the state.
Testimony indicates part of the case may have been hastily prepared. Investigators for the prosecutor didn't collect Melissa Northrup's hair samples for evidence until 2 weeks ago, and the DA winged his opening argument.
In fact, I generally kind of make it up as I go, so I've got an outline, but I don't specifically know what I'm going to say until I say it, kind of like in front of all these cameras.
While McDuff stands trial here, he's expected to be charged with the murder of Colleen Reed in Houston next week. News 8 has learned that prosecutors may strike a plea bargain with McDuff's alleged accomplice in exchange for testifying that he tortured the woman to death. Robert Riggs, Channel 8 News, Houston.
McDuff's trial is expected to last about 3 weeks. Prosecutors plan to call McDuff's mother to the stand for testimony that could help convict her son of murder.
This is News 8 at 6.
A Houston jury hands down a verdict in the murder trial of Kenneth McDuff. Hello, everyone. That story tops News 8 at 6.
The decision was announced just minutes ago. It's the second time Kenneth McDuff has faced the death penalty, this time for the murder of a 22-year-old convenience store worker, and the jury took just under 4 hours today to reach its verdict. Channel 8's Robert Riggs joins us live now with the jury's decision. Robert?
Tracy, Kenneth McDuff, 46-year-old Kenneth McDuff, a parole killer, has been convicted of capital murder in the kidnapping of 22-year-old Melissa Northrup from a Waco convenience store last March. McDuff gave a somber expression as the jury delivered its guilty verdict. Melissa Northrup's family cried and hugged one another. Northrup's brother said he couldn't stop the tears knowing what his sister suffered.
Lethal injections too quick. He put Melissa through a brutal death, and nobody should have to die that way.
And this man is going to die. The only thing I hate about it is that we're going to have to wait 10 to 15 years before he does. And that's not right. Melissa didn't get to wait 10 or 15 more years.
McDuff was paroled on a murder charge in 1989. It appears he is on his way back to death row.
46-year-old Kenneth McDuff went to the Houston courthouse where he faces the death penalty for the second time in his life. McDuff had appeared confident that taking the stand last week in his own defense may win him an acquittal of the capital murder charge.
I submit to you the evidence shows that this defendant is every person's nightmare. The evidence shows that he's the monster that comes out of the dark and jerks innocent people off the streets and takes them out and slaughters them.
Prosecutors told the jury that their case of circumstantial evidence is as good as gold. McDuff is accused of killing 22-year-old Melissa Northrup last March. Prosecution witnesses testified that McDuff talked about robbing the Waco convenience store where Northrop worked the midnight shift and of abducting the clerk. The parole killer looked down, rubbing his fingers together as prosecutors told the jury Northrop was probably sexually assaulted and mutilated.
There are some sorry people out on the street, and they need to be put back in the jail where they belong. Should have never been left out in the first place.
The defense argued McDuff is a victim of circumstance. They challenged witnesses who saw McDuff pushing his car with Northrop's car near the convenience store, as well as a witness who identified McDuff near the water-filled gravel pit in southeast Dallas County where Northrop's body was found. McDuff's attorney told the jury the convicted killer is being persecuted like Jesus Christ.
Pontius Pilate knew what he was doing was wrong, but he was too weak to stick with his convictions and follow the law. You have to stick with your convictions. You have to follow the law.
I really do not compare this jury to Pontius Pilate and Kenneth McDuff to Jesus Christ. That's ludicrous.
The trial enters its punishment phase on Thursday. The jury can decide to sentence McDuff to death by lethal injection or give him a life sentence, which means he couldn't receive parole for 35 years. McDuff looked up at the judge afterwards and asked, "When will I be sent to the death chair?" and asked that the judge not require him to be present when the punishment phase starts on Thursday, and the judge granted that request. Gloria.
All right, thanks a lot, Robert.
In Houston late today, a jury convicted paroled killer Kenneth McDuff of capital murder. Next, the jury decides whether McDuff should die by lethal injection or spend the next 35 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Channel 8's Robert Riggs reports from Houston that McDuff's defense is now preparing to appeal.
Kenneth McDuff cast an evil stare as he awaited the jury's verdict. For the second time in his life, the parole killer may get his judgment day with the executioner. The sister-in-laws of 22-year-old Melissa Northrop braced each other for the verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Kenneth Allen McDuff, guilty of capital murder as charged in the indictment.
Melissa Northrop's brother could not stop the tears of 11 months of pain. McDuff twiddled his thumbs as the judge polled the jury. McDuff abducted the pregnant mother of 2 children last March. He had bragged about robbing the Waco Quick Pack store where she worked the midnight shift and taking the clerk.
And this man is going to die. The only thing I hate about it is that we're going to have to wait 10 to 15 years before he does. And that's not right. Melissa didn't get to wait 10 or 15 more years.
Northrop's mother delivered her own angry verdict against the parole system for turning loose the convicted killer 3 years ago. McDuff escaped the electric chair for the 1966 murder of 3 teenagers after the Supreme Court struck down the death penalty. Northrop's brother waited outside the courthouse to see McDuff go back to prison where he belongs. He says lethal injection is too quick for the brutal killer.
Putting him to death will give me some satisfaction. Putting him to death will put my sister at rest. Until this man dies, my sister, you know.
McDuff's desperate attempt to take the stand in his own defense apparently backfired. McDuff flashed a sarcastic grin on his way back to jail.
I guess I'm going to die, apparently. We all do, you know.
Kenneth McDuff became a monster symbol of Texas' corrupt parole system. This nightmare is over, but law officers say dozens more McDuffs are free on the streets. Robert Riggs, Channel 8 News, Houston.
It gives us an opportunity to examine where we ought to go from here in the management of these massive institutions.
Governor Ann Richards accepts the resignation of Texas Prison Chief James Linaugh. Linaugh quits in the wake of a News 8 investigation into allegations of corruption in the parole and prison systems.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. The Texas Board of Criminal Justice tried to fire Linaugh in July, but backed off under heavy political pressure from House lawmakers. Well, today it was revealed Linaugh will leave the post he's held for 6 years to take a job at the University of Texas Medical Branch. In our News 8 investigation, we have learned the FBI has questioned at least one former warden about Linaugh's running of the prison system. Channel 8's Robert Riggs has this exclusive report.
Texas prisons under the administration of James Linaugh secretly released its most violent inmates to make room for more prisoners. Gang members and the worst prison troublemakers return to the streets early, only to commit new brutal crimes against innocent victims. Cell blocks like this one hold the shocking story that the prison system once kept secret. It's a prison within a maximum security prison called administrative segregation, or in prison slang, ADSEG. The most dangerous and vicious of the inmates are kept caged here for 23 hours out of the day. They can't even be trusted to leave their cells to eat. Yet the Texas Department of Criminal Justice turned 1,700 of them loose on the public. Many should not have gotten out because they had lost good time credit off their sentences because of disciplinary problems. Lionel, in an interview before his resignation, admits the prison system freed inmates who couldn't get along in the prison world, much less the free world, just to prevent overcrowding. I mean, how could you turn people loose that are the worst of the worst on society, that hadn't had their good time restored for violating the rules and assaulting guards and other inmates in the prison?
I can assure you that a number of the security people objected to the procedure.
Why didn't you stop it?
It was the parole board's doing. It was authorized by the parole board.
The parole board says that that this was just a paper sham, that you wanted them out the door, that you wanted new space in the prison, more space, that some of these people were even released at midnight in Huntsville.
Well, there were people released at midnight in order not to break the 95%. But the real thing is, if you look at it realistically, the prison was going to be full one way or another. In other words, we were going to operate right at 94%. If I released one, I get another one. In essence, pressure, the prison people didn't care.
Wardens and guards who complained about releases from ADSEG were threatened with their jobs. We obtained this exclusive video from prison sources. The prison system refused us access to ADSEG units and refused to provide a list of inmates who were free. State Controller John Sharp obtained a partial list of inmates set free from ADSEG. The prison system destroyed 2 years' worth of documents in an apparent violation of the Records Retention Act.
You can't just simply say because of release we let a violent criminal out to make room for a nonviolent criminal that subsequently went out and raped someone.
Our review of Sharp's records found that 87 inmates freed from ADSEG are now fugitives wanted for new violent crimes, including 4 murders, 4 attempted murders, 12 rapes, 7 child molestations, 5 child abuse cases, and 29 armed robberies. Countless more inmates released from ADSEG are back in prison serving new sentences. One of them is Servando Pachacano, convicted of killing one of 2 women that he kidnapped from a Fort Worth optical store in 1990. Pachacano left 41-year-old Cruz Torres bound and gagged in an abandoned building. Torres, a mother of 4 children, suffocated. Pachacano went on a violent crime spree in Fort Worth just 8 months after he was released from a prison cell block reserved for the meanest of the mean. Lionel will leave the prison system under a cloud of controversy just as Controller Sharp launches a massive audit. Sharp took the unusual step of asking District Attorney Ronnie Earl to assist and investigate any allegations of criminal wrongdoing. Robert Riggs, Channel 8 News, Austin. Convicted child molester Robert Elliott got paroled out of prison after serving less than 9 years of a life sentence and 2 20-year sentences. 2 parole board members turned the 47-year-old pedophile loose on Dallas streets despite his own admission of exposing himself to children 30 times. Since his release last year, Elliott has been caught exposing himself twice.
He scared me. I mean, I'm still scared because that man stared at me so bad I couldn't even sleep those couple of nights.
In early September, Farmers Branch police arrested Elliott outside this apartment house. Elva Alfaro's 2 daughters were among 5 children playing patty cake when the incident occurred nearby. Alfaro says some of the children saw Elliott wearing only pantyhose. After getting her children indoors, Alfaro and a neighbor told police that Elliott then exposed himself.
I can't believe I let him go. I wish that he was still back in jail, prison, put it that way, locked for good.
Elliott's criminal record includes 2 previous convictions for crimes against children. In 1976, he received a 16-year sentence for indecency with a child and burglary. Elliott only served 1/4 of that sentence before getting paroled. Less than 3 years later, in 1983, Elliott molested 3 girls in Dallas County. He received a life sentence and 2 20-year sentences for 3 counts of indecency with a child. But the serial molester got out of prison again in September 1992.
Elliott was paroled after serving less than 9 years of a life sentence with the influential help of former parole board chairman James Granberry. Granberry's attorney says his client has no comment on the case.
James Granberry hired on for $1,000 as Elliott's parole consultant. Earlier, as the powerful parole board chairman, Granberry had taken a special interest in Elliott's case. A few days after resigning from the board in May of 1991, Granberry began asking his friends on the board to parole Elliott. In July of 1991, Granberry appeared with Elliott's family before a Palestine parole panel. The next day, parole board member Troy Fox and then board member Frank Ekenberg of Dallas approved Elliott's parole.
I don't know what influence peddling was going on, if any.
Senator John Whitmire sponsored a new law that cracks down on parole consultants.
I can't imagine a normal person looking at his record and this evidence allowing him out a day sooner than he could have been kept.
Another panel withdrew the parole after board member Kenneth Coleman in Huntsville brought out additional information. Prison guards had confiscated homemade pedophile sex albums from Elliott's cell during 2 different searches. The pictures are too perverted to show or even describe. We asked Patsy Day, whose group provides emotional and legal support to the victims of violent crime, for her reaction.
This is what was found in this offender's cell, and they still let him out. And it was brought to the attention of the parole board. And that's only one page of a catalog of what he had. Can you imagine that somebody would vote to release that?
No, I cannot. But then we also have people in our society that say that pornography is harmless. And I get very upset over both of those. No, I cannot imagine. It's beyond me.
In this internal memo, a clinical psychologist who interviewed Elliott about the picture album warned the board that this inmate is a fixated pedophile, one who has sought children for sexual gratification throughout his life. Research literature indicates an extremely poor prognosis. Treatment is seldom, if ever, successful for fixated pedophiles. In my opinion, there is strong potential for reoffending. A year later, this 2-member parole panel of Troy Fox and Hub Bechtel voted to free Elliott. Bechtel did not return News 8's phone request for an interview. Troy Fox refused to talk about Elliott's parole because of a federal investigation of James Granberry. And Frank Ekenberg, who voted for Elliott's parole a year earlier, also did not return our calls.
I mean, that's the one you know about. What about the ones we don't know about?
So what do we do about the board members that are sitting there swinging the door open for these child molesters?
Well, the buck stops at the governor's office.
Right now, all of these authorities are protected. They're protected against suits. They're protected against, there's nothing we can do.
Except suffer.
Except suffer. I heard somebody say one time the only right the victim has is to be at the scene of the crime, and I think that's basically true.
James Granberry solicited another $1,000 from Elliott's family for what he called a love offering before Elliott got out of prison in September of last year. Federal authorities have charged the former parole board chairman and parole consultant with perjury and accused him of bribery in a different case.
How'd you make parole? How'd you hire James Granberry? You know Mr. Granberry? Who hired him for you? I've never met him.
Elliott is scheduled to stand trial for indecent exposure in early January. Robert Riggs, Channel 8 News.
Former parole board member Frank Ekenberg now faces criminal charges for his alleged involvement in the Texas parole scandal. Internal affairs officers from the Texas Department
James Granberry bolted from the Waco Federal Courthouse after pleading guilty to perjury. The former chairman of the Texas Parole Board also admitted his role in a bribery scheme described in filings by the Justice Department. Granberry, who served as Lubbock's mayor and ran as a Republican nominee for governor in 1974, showed no remorse. U.S. Prosecutor Bill Johnston says Granberry's guilty plea confirms justice has been for sale in Texas.
it's who you know and what you can do a lot of times to get folks out of prison, and I don't think that's the way the system was designed.
As parole board chairman, Granberry accepted 2 discount lease cars through arrangements by Dallas businessman Carl Westcott 3 years ago. The former Dallas auto dealer runs Westcott Communications, which produces the Law Enforcement Training Network. Westcott's son, Gary, received parole after serving only 1/3 of a 25-year sentence for murder. Then, Granberry received this Pontiac Grand Am and a Toyota, which was driven by the secretary of a parole division official. Granberry's attorney disputes that his client acknowledged in court accepting a bribe.
When you've been practicing law 20 years, it's a little hard to be shocked over a lot of things, sir.
Selling paroles is not shocking?
I don't think that there's the evidence there showing selling paroles.
This guy had a son that wanted out of prison, who was convicted of a very serious crime, and you can read in there where, in return and in connection with a favorable lease on some vehicles, the kid got out.
The manhunt for serial killer Kenneth McDuff led to the investigation of corruption in the Texas parole system. Granberry cast the tie-breaking vote that parole McDuff, who has received 2 death sentences since his release. Granberry had a long-standing personal friendship and family financial ties to McDuff's attorney. James Granberry once held the key to freedom for one of the largest prison systems in the free world. Now Granberry is a convicted felon. He is cooperating in an ongoing state and federal investigation of corruption in the Texas justice system. Robert Riggs, Channel 8 News, Waco. Investigators say they may have found the remains of a Waco woman abducted 7 years ago by notorious serial killer Kenneth McDuff. McDuff, who was once the target of a nationwide manhunt, recently received a stay of execution for the murder of another Waco woman. A forensic anthropologist from Baylor University uncovered the partially clothed skeleton. It's believed to be 21-year-old Regina Moore, who was last seen struggling in McDuff's car in 1991. The shallow grave was hidden beneath boulders beside Highway 6 east of Waco. Federal prosecutor Bill Johnston, who led the dragnet for McDuff, says a confidential informant guided them to the grave site.
We felt like ever since we started chasing him that there were things we would learn in time. This is one, and I got to tell you this, if this is any indication, it's going to be interesting because this was exactly where it was supposed to be, within a foot.
McDuff's violent temper flared after he received 2 death sentences 4 years ago. He is the first ever Texas death row inmate to have been paroled and then sentenced again for another capital murder. McDuff abducted Colleen Reed, a 28-year-old accountant, from an Austin car wash in 1991. Her body was never found. McDuff also kidnapped Melissa Northrup, a 22-year-old pregnant mother of 2 children, from a Waco convenience store in early 1992.
The guy seemed to have no soul, was much more like an animal, a predator, than a human being. Involved himself with not just killing but torture, horrible torture of victims who pleaded for their lives.
McDuff received parole even though he had killed 3 Fort Worth area teenagers in 1966. News 8's investigation of McDuff's release uncovered a bribery scandal involving the Texas Parole Board. As a result, outraged lawmakers passed a McDuff law. It requires capital murder inmates to serve 40 years before they're eligible for parole, and violent offenders to serve 1/2 of their sentences. It had appeared that Kenneth McDuff would take his horrible secrets to his grave, but now investigators say they are a step closer to unearthing what happened to the many women who disappeared in McDuff's deadly hands. Robert Riggs, Channel 8 News, outside Waco.
God bless the child who suffers.
It took a long time, but a victim of a serial killer is finally given a proper funeral in Austin. Colleen Reed's body comes home after her disappearance 7 years ago.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us. A News 8 investigation 6 years ago found that the serial killer who murdered 28-year-old Colleen Reed should have never been set free. Kenneth McDuff became the first ever Texas death row inmate to have been paroled and then later sentenced 2 more times for capital murder. Channel 8's Robert Riggs exposed a shocking scandal involving charges of bribery in the parole of McDuff and other killers. Tonight, Robert reports from Austin, where the last known missing victim is being laid to rest.
The U.S. Marshals and prosecutor who vowed that Colleen Reed would someday receive a decent burial with flowers kept their promise. After searching for the body of the murder victim for 7 years, they brought Colleen Reed home to Austin. At last, a packed church of family and friends could pay their final respects.
And we bring our gratitude to those whose caring pursuit of justice has made these healing moments possible.
Edna Louise Sullivan. Robert Brand.
Colleen Reed's sister and former fiancé placed a rose in honor of the other victims claimed by her killer. The memorial list started with the 3 teenagers killed in Tarrant County back in 1966 by Kenneth McDuff. McDuff abducted Colleen Reed from an Austin car wash 7 years ago. He had carried her secret burial place to death row until last week, when a confidential informant led officers to the graves of Reed and 2 other women murdered by McDuff.
Colleen was Daddy's precious, darling, baby, angel girl.
Friends remembered Colleen Reed as a loving daughter, loyal sister, doting aunt, animal lover, practical joker, fundraiser for needy children, a CPA, and proud Marine reservist. Although the recovery of her body will help the family heal, it also reopened painful wounds. Kenneth McDuff's rattlesnake temper struck out when he was sentenced for killing Reed. He was out on parole when investigators say the sadistic sexual killer took the lives of countless women. Public outrage prompted passage of a so-called McDuff law that keeps violent criminals behind bars longer and capital murderers in prison for at least 40 years. Reed's sister says good came out of evil.
Positive changes were made as a result of what happened to Colleen. We changed laws, we built prisons, we became more aware of crime victims' needs and pain.
God bless the young without mothers.
Colleen Reed's mourners prayed that they might learn from the loss of the vibrant young woman and make their city a better and safer place to live.
Let us all love one another.
One mystery still remains. 6 years ago, our investigation uncovered allegations by members of McDuff's family that a $25,000 bribe was paid to an unidentified state official. For now, it appears that McDuff will take that secret to his grave. Chip?
Robert, as some of our viewers may recall, McDuff recently received a stay of execution. So what's his status on death row right now?
Chip, I'm told that a judge is drawing up a new order and that Kenneth McDuff could finally be executed by the end of the year. Tracy?
Okay, Robert. Thank you very much.
Kenneth McDuff walked out of the Walls unit on parole 9 years ago. Tuesday afternoon, the notorious serial killer returns here to be executed. McDuff will be strip searched when he arrives at the death house. He'll spend his final hours in this cell. McDuff requested 2 T-bone steaks for his last meal. There is no T-bone in the Texas prison system. If no stay of execution stops the proceeding, 5 guards will then escort McDuff on his final walk.
Kenneth McDuff will be brought into the death chamber and strapped to this gurney at 6 p.m. The prison chaplain will be standing here with his hand on McDuff's right leg. The prison warden stands here, and he will ask McDuff if he has any last thing to say. McDuff has 2 minutes to answer.
In sharp contrast, rose bushes and razor wire line where the families of McDuff's victims will walk to witness the execution.
I just want to make sure he's dead, that he's not going to hurt any other person. He's not going to take away another child from their mother.
Brenda and Richard Solomon lost their daughter Melissa Northrup and more. McDuff abducted the pregnant mother of 2 children from the Waco convenience store where she worked. Northrup's family is among a dozen witnesses evenly divided between victims and the condemned killer. They're separated by a thin wall and will have no contact.
The bad part of it is it's so easy. For me, the way I feel about it, it's so easy. The way he's going and what he put his victims through, his way of going is easy.
The lethal dosage will flow through IVs in each of McDuff's arms. First, an anesthesia will put McDuff to sleep, then a muscle relaxant, and finally potassium chloride, which stops the heart. It will be over in 2 minutes.
I feel like I've got to hear him say, he's gone. And then I'll put away the rest of the things. And in my 30-something years to be gone, it'll be at rest.
Jack Brand's only son, Robert, was among 3 Tarrant County teenagers that McDuff was charged with killing in 1966. McDuff told the judge he did it for kicks and received the death penalty. He was spared the electric chair when the Supreme Court overturned the Texas death penalty in 1972. 17 years later, McDuff received a highly unusual parole.
We find out that he's bribing people. People are exchanging money to get him out. And what does he do? He gets out and kills again. It's totally wrong. He's a monster.
Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil.
The families of McDuff's victims say there is no closure for their tragedy, only peace knowing that others will be safe from the monster who robbed them for a lifetime.
Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Robert Riggs, Channel 8 News, Huntsville.
Well, I think I've been given death penalty.
Indeed, serial killer Kenneth McDuff received another sentence with the Texas executioner. A Seguin jury gave prosecutors an insurance policy against the once parole killer ever getting out of prison again.
He's a killing machine is what he is, and I don't think I have ever seen or heard of anybody who more thoroughly embodied what we think of as evil as Kenneth McDuff. And I think what this verdict shows is that we can do something about evil.
McDuff casually twiddled his fingers during sentencing. The sister of 29-year-old Colleen Reed sobbed uncontrollably. Investigators never found where McDuff dumped the body of the petite accountant. The 47-year-old notorious killer became the first man in Texas history to receive the death penalty 3 times.
The last chapter will always be reserved for bringing Colleen home.
McDuff's latest death sentence came on the 2nd anniversary of the abduction of Waco convenience store clerk Melissa Northrup. Northrup's mother came to give support to Colleen Reed's sister. Last year, McDuff received the death sentence for killing the pregnant mother of 2.
I can see the devil in him, because I believe he is the devil himself.
McDuff and his accomplice Hank Alva Worley randomly abducted Colleen Reed from an Austin car wash in December of 1991. Worley testified against McDuff. Reed's murder occurred 3 weeks after the still unsolved killings of 4 teenage girls in an Austin yogurt shop. Federal authorities considered McDuff a prime suspect, but a fire set by the unknown killer destroyed evidence. Suddenly, last week, McDuff blamed his accomplice in the Reed murder for the yogurt shop murders.
And he also told me that he liked to watch burning flesh and the smell of it.
Law officers believe McDuff may have projected his guilt in the yogurt shop murder onto Worley and renewed their investigation. After 3 death sentences stemming from murders since 1966, McDuff has always insisted he was innocent. If he was involved in Austin's yogurt shop murders, it's a secret he will probably keep hidden on death row. Robert Riggs, Channel 8 News, Seguin.
I said, turn loose. Settle down, don't.
necessary to be home. Yes, it is. All right.
Kenneth, were you surprised?
I said turn loose of it. I said turn loose of it. Settle down, fella. This ain't necessary to be hanging on to.
Why don't you want to be there?
Kenneth, have you decided you want to come back to court now?
Let me just talk to the reporter just a second. I have some information you might be interested in. The yogurt shop murders, Hank Worley told me he took part in those. And he also told me that he liked to watch burning flesh and the smell of it. He also told a man he worked with and lived at the Blue Motel in Belton something similar to what I just told you. And if you check that out, I'll give you something else to check out at noon.
When did he tell you that?
January of '92, first part of January.
And this is the first time you've seen it?
Okay. Well, I thought it had adverse effect on my trial, possibly.
One of the most feared men in Texas is at this hour preparing to die. Barring any unexpected last-minute stays, Kenneth Alec McDuff will be executed this evening. Channel 8's Robert Riggs has followed McDuff and his grisly trail of murder and rape for many years now, and he joins us this evening live from Huntsville, where, Robert, it's all about to come to an end, isn't it?
It is indeed, Chip. Prison guards moved Kenneth McDuff to the death house here at the Walls Unit in downtown Huntsville shortly after noon. Prison officials described his mood as both docile and joking. He is scheduled to die by lethal injection 1 hour from now. Inside the Texas prison death house, investigators continued trying to pry information out of Kenneth McDuff about a string of unsolved murders. They will remain there until McDuff's hour of execution scheduled for 6 p.m. News 8 has learned that a prison internal affairs investigator and FBI criminal profilers interviewed McDuff for more than 100 hours starting last week. Federal law enforcement sources say McDuff revealed that he cruised every major city in Texas looking for women to abduct. He also made frequent trips into Mexico while out on parole for 3 years until his arrest in 1992. Investigators suspect he could be responsible for dozens of murders. But McDuff turned angry and quit talking. McDuff claimed he would give a full confession in a taped interview to a documentary film producer from Austin. But the prison system was concerned that McDuff's family might later profit from the production. And there was concern that McDuff was just trying to manipulate the system one last time. News 8 has also learned that it was McDuff who pinpointed the location of 3 of his victims' bodies last month. McDuff drew precise maps of where to find the graves in remote areas. When investigators couldn't locate that of Colleen Reed, McDuff was secretly taken out of death row to help. At the scene, McDuff told a searcher to move 5 feet. There were the remains of the 28-year-old accountant that McDuff abducted from an Austin car wash in late 1991. McDuff, according to federal sources, also gave a detailed account of the abduction and murder of 3 Tarrant County teenagers in 1966. McDuff escaped the electric chair for killing Robert Brand when the Supreme Court overturned the death penalty.
It just hurts. But I believe if this sentence goes out like it's supposed to, we'll get a little relief from that. Just knowing that he will not ever get out again and hurt nobody else.
In 1989, McDuff received a highly unusual parole amid allegations of bribery that were uncovered by News 8. McDuff set off on a new reign of terror. He received 2 death sentences for Colleen Reed and Melissa Northrop, who was a pregnant mother of 2 children.
All the pain he has caused. It's time for him to leave this world.
The families and friends of 4 of McDuff's victims will witness the execution here at 6 p.m. Usually, these events are marked by protests from anti-death penalty groups. They are not here, evident today. Chip?
Robert, has McDuff ordered the traditional last meal down there at Huntsville?
He has, Chip. He ordered 2 16-ounce T-bone steaks, 5 fried eggs, vegetables, French fries, coconut pie, and 1 Coke. But there are no T-bone steaks in the Texas prison system. Instead, he got Salisbury, and they were not serving coconut pie today. He got peach pie. Chip.
Okay, thank you very much, Robert.
Just moments from now, behind these walls, serial murderer Kenneth McDuff will be executed. 32 years of eluding the death penalty is about to come to an end.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Kenneth McDuff is the only Texas inmate to have been paroled from death row, only to be returned for another capital murder. McDuff might be responsible for as many as a dozen murders, but at this hour, he'll be put to death for sexually assaulting and killing a pregnant mother of 2. Channel 8's Robert Riggs has followed McDuff's crime spree for many years and now is watching his final moments. Robert?
Gloria, Kenneth McDuff truly fears this moment. Our prison sources tell us that he wanted to smuggle in heroin to give himself a deadly overdose. If everything is going as planned at this hour, he has been strapped to a gurney, and within 2 minutes of receiving the lethal injection, he should be dead. The families and friends of 4 of Kenneth McDuff's victims went inside the death chamber to find final peace and justice. They had declared McDuff the personification of evil.
I think he's one of the devil's children. I don't expect to see him in heaven.
Indeed, shortly before his execution, McDuff said he didn't want to be sitting on some mountaintop in heaven singing hymns. I want to party, McDuff told investigators that were trying to pry final bits of information out of the serial killer. For the first time, McDuff showed fear and said, I'm ready to die. What I don't like is them telling me when I'm dying, according to federal law enforcement sources.
From what I hear, he is afraid of dying. What do you think he's afraid of?
Meeting his maker, who is the devil himself. I'd be afraid too.
Brenda Solomon's daughter, Melissa Northrup, is the victim McDuff is scheduled to be executed for capital murder. McDuff abducted the pregnant mother of 2 children from a Waco convenience store. McDuff showed arrogant contempt for life when he received the death penalty 5 years ago.
I guess I'm going to die, apparently. We all do, you know.
Just as he controlled the destiny of his many victims, McDuff wanted to control the date of his execution by getting a stay. When it appeared no stay was forthcoming, McDuff turned unruly and angry last night. He quit talking to a prison investigator and FBI agents. McDuff had hinted he would confess to a string of murders, including the yogurt shop case in Austin, and reveal accomplices if he could do it in a documentary film interview. The prison system says it rejected the deal, concerned that McDuff's family might later profit from the production. News 8 has also learned that it was McDuff who pinpointed the bodies of 3 of his victims last month. McDuff drew precise maps to the sites where he buried the young women. When investigators couldn't find the remains of Colleen Reed, McDuff was secretly taken off death row to help. He told a searcher to move over 5 feet, where they found the 28-year-old Austin accountant who had been missing for more than 6 years. McDuff's cooperation was solely motivated by trying to reduce a drug sentence for his nephew. The victims' families just went inside to witness the execution. The usual anti-death penalty protesters are not evident here this evening. It is indisputable that if McDuff had been put to death 33 years ago, at least 5 young women would still be alive. Gloria, Tracy.
We, of course, have Robert Riggs in Huntsville tonight.
Let's go back down there now to get the latest on Kenneth McDuff. Robert?
Tracy, the families of Kenneth McDuff's 4 victims are now coming out from witnessing what appears to have been the execution has been completed. Kenneth McDuff, 52-year-old Kenneth McDuff, the most notorious serial killer in Texas history, appears to be dead. And in the distance, there is applause coming up from the crowd of onlookers. Tracy, Gloria, that's the front there. It's Jack Brand, the father of Robert Brand of Fort Worth, who was killed by McDuff in 1966.
Okay, Robert Riggs reporting from Huntsville, and of course Robert will have a full wrap-up tonight at 10 o'clock as well.
This is the News 8 Update.
It's over. He's gone.
8 minutes after receiving a lethal injection, convicted serial killer Kenneth McDuff is pronounced dead.
a quiet ending to a vicious and sadistic life of crime.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us. If ever there were a case for capital punishment, some say it's Kenneth McDuff. He got off death row and out of prison for the 1966 murders of 3 teenagers. But tonight, the executioner caught up with McDuff. Channel 8's Robert Riggs has followed McDuff's grisly trail to the end and joins us now live from Huntsville. Robert?
Chip, the families of Kenneth McDuff's victims say that Satan came to claim his son here tonight. Indeed, I've learned that shortly before his execution, McDuff told investigators that he didn't want to sing hymns from some hilltop in heaven. He wanted to go to a place where he could party. The clock on the Texas death house ticked off Kenneth McDuff's final minutes before execution. Shortly after 6 p.m., McDuff walked to the death chamber. Guards strapped the serial killer to a gurney. At precisely 6:18, McDuff spoke his final brief words.
He said, "I'm ready to be released. Release me."
With that said, the lethal dose of chemicals began flowing into McDuff's arm. He closed his eyes and let out short gasps of air.
And then a long exhale, and then there was no further movement.
McDuff was pronounced dead at 6:26 p.m. The families of 4 of McDuff's victims who witnessed the execution left with a sense of relief.
I want y'all all to know I am very glad this is over with. My children are going to rest in peace now. And he's going where he needs to go.
McDuff was executed for abducting 22-year-old Melissa Northrup, a pregnant mother of 2 children. The families of 3 Tarrant County teenagers murdered by McDuff in 1966 had waited 32 years for justice. It was an uncle, aunt-to-be, and cousin that Cindy Easley never knew.
I was 2 years old when this happened. I don't have any memories of my family. That's what he took away from me. My mother loved her brother dearly, and she was never the same after that.
In the month preceding his death, McDuff led investigators to the bodies of 3 of his victims. Regina Moore of Waco was one of them.
About the only thing I have to say is it's finished for him, but it still goes on for all of us.
McDuff also faced a death sentence for abducting 28-year-old Colleen Reed from an Austin car wash in 1991. Her sister chose not to witness the execution.
What was important to me was that the death sentence be carried out and that he be executed and that he never have the opportunity to hurt another person on this earth.
The victims' families say that McDuff's execution marks the end of a tragic chapter in their lives, one that would not have been written for at least 5 young women if McDuff had not been released from prison in the first place. Chip?
Robert, you mentioned murder victim Melissa Northrup, who had 2 children. Whatever happened to the 2 children?
Well, her 10-year-old daughter and 12-year-old son are being raised by Brenda Solomon, their grandmother, and she says now she can fully focus on giving them a loving life for the future.
All right, thanks a lot. That's Robert Riggs reporting live tonight from Huntsville.
Tonight, the exclusive story of Kenneth McDuff's final days on Texas death row, including an 11th hour confession that closed the books on a 32-year-old murder.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. The serial killer who had always professed his innocence changed his story before his execution. And Channel 8's Robert Riggs has the story of what McDuff told the veteran prison investigator.
During his final days on Texas death row, Kenneth McDuff gave his first ever confession. McDuff admitted that he killed 3 Tarrant County teenagers 32 years ago. Veteran prison investigator John Moriarty interviewed McDuff about his criminal life for 2 weeks leading up to the execution. Moriarty says McDuff showed no shame, no regret, no remorse.
He is the true, for everything I know, he's the true serial killer. He is the most violent individual, inmate, person that I've ever been in contact with in my life.
Moriarty met face-to-face with McDuff in the prison infirmary. He says McDuff casually discussed torturing animals as a child and his first attempt to abduct a girl when he was only 12. McDuff gave a blood-chilling account of cruising hundreds of miles randomly hunting for his next victim.
And that's his words. That's what he said, that he would go out and hunt for a woman.
Hunt? Cruise or?
Hunt, the term hunt.
Like he's hunting an animal.
That's correct.
Moriarty says McDuff bragged that he was different and could take what he wanted. McDuff had an exceptional ability to sense fear in people and use it against them. McDuff called his sadistic eruptions cold rage. 36 hours before his execution, McDuff was moved to this cell for the final death watch. Everything he did was logged by the half hour, and he was sleepless and tense. Moriarty says McDuff believed he could control the date of his own execution, just as he controlled the moment of death for his victims. McDuff confidently expected a stay of execution, but it was rejected.
He was very shocked. I'd say he was very surprised that it was finally carried out.
McDuff told the investigator he wanted to be remembered as a famous serial killer. His painful legacy brought sweeping changes in the law that will keep the Kenneth McDuffs of this world locked up for life. Robert Riggs, Channel 8 News, inside Texas Death Row.
McDuff gave up a few new details about murders in which he was already the prime suspect, but the sadistic sexual killer refused to reveal whether he abducted any more than 5 women. Investigators say the number could be far greater, but McDuff took it to his grave.
No one has wanted to claim the body of serial killer Kenneth McDuff. McDuff was executed on Tuesday. Residents in his home county in central Texas had reportedly protested his burial there. So today, McDuff was buried in the Texan prison's cemetery in Huntsville.